Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap. That was the main reason, though I told myself it was also charming and off the beaten path. Truthfully, I just didn't want to spend a fortune on a hotel. The photos looked fine, a small studio apartment attached to an old farmhouse, white walls, a little kitchenette, even a desk where I could set up my laptop. Clean, minimalist. The reviews were short but positive. The drive out there took longer than expected. The property was tucked in the hills, far from town, surrounded by fields and leafless trees that scratched the sky like skeletal hands. The farmhouse itself was dark, no lights in the windows. My rental was a converted outbuilding at the edge of the property. The host had messaged me not to worry if we didn't meet in person. She left the key under the mat. I let myself in. The place looked exactly like the pictures. White walls, sparse furniture, a bed, a desk, a chair, a kitchenette, and a bathroom tucked behind a sliding door. A faint scent of bleach hung in the air, sharp and clean. For a moment, I felt proud of myself. It was perfectly fine. I unpacked, ate a snack, and tried to settle in. The Wi-Fi worked, though it was slow. I scrolled mindlessly, then lay down to rest. That's when I noticed the first thing. On the far wall, near the ceiling, was a smoke detector. At least, I thought it was. But it looked wrong. Slightly bulkier, with a dark pinprick hole in the middle that seemed to follow me when I shifted. I told myself I was being paranoid. Smoke detectors came in all shapes. Still, I moved to the other side of the bed, out of its direct line. When I showered later, the bathroom mirror bothered me. It was a square panel bolted flush to the wall, without a frame. The glass was slightly tinted, faintly darker than it should have been. I leaned close, tapping it with my knuckle. A hollow sound. Too hollow. Stop it, I muttered to myself. You're tired. You're imagining things. But unease pulled in me, slow and sticky. After dinner, I sat at the desk to answer emails. That's when I noticed another detail, a tiny dot of light on the bookshelf, low to the ground. I bent down. It was a lens, no bigger than a fingernail, nestled between the books. My stomach lurched. I tore the book away. Behind it, wired into the shelf, was a camera. Definitely a camera. The red light blinked once, then went out. I backed away so fast the chair toppled. My hands shook. Every nerve in me screamed to run, but where would I go? It was past 10, I didn't know the area, and the farmhouse loomed silent and dark just beyond the trees. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was security. Maybe the host had mentioned it somewhere in the fine print. I pulled up the Airbnb listing, scrolling through the description. Nothing. No mention of cameras. In fact, the page looked different. The photos were gone, replaced by a gray placeholder that read this listing is currently unavailable. I refreshed. Same thing. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned off the lights, thinking maybe I could sleep and leave first thing in the morning. But lying there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes adjusted slowly, picking out the outlines of furniture. That's when I saw another faint glimmer near the corner of the ceiling this time. A different lens. I couldn't help it, panic surged through me. I jumped up, flicked the light back on, and began searching. The more I looked, the more I found. A pinhole in the smoke detector. Another in the lamp base. One embedded in the clock by the bed. Each time I found one, My breath came faster, my chest tighter. They were everywhere. And they weren't just cameras. They were alive. On the desk was a small flat-screen TV I hadn't noticed before, dark and lifeless. My hand brushed against the remote beside it. Almost against my will, I picked it up and pressed the power button. The screen flickered on. It showed me. Not just me, but me right then, standing frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the TV. The image was from the ceiling angle, slightly distorted. A second later, the feed cut to another angle, me from the corner, then from the bookshelf, then the bathroom mirror. A rotation of every camera I'd spotted, one after another, all streaming in real time. I couldn't move. My own face stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, every angle dissected. Then, abruptly, the feed changed. It wasn't the room anymore. It was a chat window, scrolling rapidly. Hundreds of usernames, comments pouring in. He's panicking now. Look at him. Don't leave yet. Stay. The words blurred together, a flood of ice pressing in. I grabbed my bag and bolted. The night air was frigid as I ran across the gravel toward my car. My hand shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. I started the engine, headlights cutting through the trees. Gravel crunched under my tires as I sped down the narrow road, heart hammering with each curve. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near the highway. Bright lights, other people, safety. I parked crookedly and stumbled inside, clutching my bag like a lifeline. I told the clerk everything in a rush, the cameras, the stream, the chat window. He gave me a long look, skeptical, but eventually called the police. When the officers arrived, I explained again, begged them to check the property. They took my statement, their expressions unreadable. One finally said they'd send someone out. I waited in my car, shaking, until a patrol unit returned hours later. They told me the building was empty. No cameras, no screens, nothing. Just bare walls and furniture. I insisted, desperate, but they only shook their heads. They suggested I might have been tired, stressed, maybe hallucinating. I knew better. The next day, I checked the Airbnb site again. The listing was gone entirely, as if it had never existed. My reservation history had been wiped clean. No record. But I wasn't crazy. Because when I closed my laptop that night, I saw it, a tiny, unblinking red light reflected in the dark of my screen. Watching. Always watching. The night my car broke down, nothing about the evening had suggested disaster. I'd been driving back from a work trip, hours of highway unraveling behind me, when I decided to cut through the back roads to save time. My GPS chirped happily, guiding me along narrow lanes hemmed in by thick woods. The radio hissed with static. I told myself it was fine. Just a detour. Then, the car sputtered. A cough, a shudder, and the dashboard lit up with warning lights. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the engine giving a last pathetic wheeze before dying altogether. The sudden silence was immense, swallowing even the insects. I sat there a moment, gripping the wheel, trying not to panic. Cars broke down all the time. I had roadside assistance. I'd call, they'd send a tow, and I'd be laughing about it tomorrow. I dialed the number, gave them my location as best I could. They promised someone would be there within 40 minutes. 40 minutes wasn't so bad. I leaned back, cracked the window, and tried to relax. The woods pressed in on both sides, a dark wall. My phone had one flickering bar of service. I decided not to test it by scrolling. The first set of headlights appeared 20 minutes later. Relief flooded me. Maybe the tow was early. A battered pickup slowed, pulled in behind me, and a man climbed out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a work jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached, raising a hand in greeting. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was even, friendly enough. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Tow's on the way." He peered into the cab, then at the hood. "Mind if I take a look?" "Ah, sure." I popped it. He fiddled for a few minutes, muttering. Finally he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Looks like your alternator's gone. Won't be going anywhere tonight." "That's what the tow's for," I said, trying to sound casual. "Good thinking." He gave a short nod. Then, instead of leaving, he leaned against my car. "I'll wait with you. Not safe out here alone." It was kind. Too kind. "That's okay," I said quickly. "I don't want to keep you. I'll be fine." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No trouble. I've got time." I told myself not to be rude. Maybe he was just a good Samaritan, the kind people write heartwarming stories about. So I nodded, rolled up the window a little, and sat back. He stayed by the hood, hands in his jacket pockets, face unreadable in the shadows. Minutes dragged. Every time I glanced out, he was still there. Not pacing, not on his phone, just waiting. 40 minutes passed. No tow truck. I called again, my voice too loud in the stillness. The dispatcher apologized. The driver was delayed, but on the way. Another 30 minutes, she promised. When I hung up, he was watching me. "Everything good?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Just running late." He nodded, but didn't move. The woods seemed to lean closer. I noticed small things now, how he never looked away for long, how he stood too still, how his lips pressed together like he was holding something back. An hour crawled by. No truck. My nerves buzzed. I texted a friend my location, just in case. No response. Probably no service. Finally, I worked up the courage. I rolled the window down an inch. "Listen, I really appreciate the help, but you don't need to stay. I'll be fine." He tilted his head, like I'd spoken in another language. Then he smiled again, too wide. "Best we wait together." The way he said together made my skin crawl. The next time I called roadside, no one answered. Just a recorded loop telling me to hold. My phone battery slipped down to 15%. Still, he stayed. Every so often, he would circle the car, slow steps crunching in the gravel, before returning to lean near the hood. At one point he bent low, peering at my tires, running his hand along the rim like he was checking something. I locked the doors. He noticed. His smile flickered, then returned. "You nervous?" he asked. "No," I lied again. "Good. No need to be nervous. We'll wait. We'll wait until they come." But hours had passed, and no one was coming. I knew that now. Either the tow had gotten lost, or worse, I had no signal anymore. I was stranded. With him. I decided to bluff. "Actually," I said, raising my voice, "my brother's on his way too. He should be here soon." The man's expression didn't change. He just murmured, "Good. More the merrier." That was when real fear took root. He wasn't planning to leave. He wasn't planning to let me leave. The woods pressed tight, the road empty. I sat frozen, every sense screaming. At last, headlights appeared again, growing brighter, cutting the dark. A fan, slowing as it approached. Hope surged, but the man stepped into the lane, waving it down. The fan stopped. My heart thudded as two men climbed out. They wore reflective vests, Terry tools, a tow service. I nearly sobbed with relief. But then the driver spoke. "Sorry we're late. Dispatch only called us 20 minutes ago." My mouth went dry. "I called 2 hours ago." The man in the baseball cap turned to me, smiling. "See? Told you. Best we wait together." Something in me snapped. I threw the door open, bolted past the tow workers, sprinting into the woods. Branches tore at my arms, roots snagged my shoes, but I didn't stop. Behind me, voices called my name, though I'd never given it. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough that the shouts faded, long enough that the night air shredded my lungs. I stumbled onto another road, collapsed under a streetlight, sobbing. A passing car slowed. A real driver, a woman, rolled her window down. Her concerned face swam in my vision. She drove me to the nearest town, where I called the police. They searched, but found nothing. No broken down car, no pickup, no tow van. Nothing but an empty road. I never found out who he was, or what would have happened if I'd stayed. But I still hear his words sometimes, whispering when I'm alone. Best we wait together. I had one of those days where the hours drag and smear together, the kind of day that makes you feel scraped thin. By the time I left the office, it was past 11, and the city had that muffled, exhausted quiet, traffic reduced to a trickle of headlights. I kept my earbuds in, walking fast, half on autopilot, craving nothing more than the warmth of my apartment and the relief of shutting the door behind me. The lobby of my building smelled faintly of bleach. One of the overhead lights flickered with a mosquito on. I didn't wait for the elevator. It was sluggish at night, and I just wanted to move. 3 flights up, my feet dragging, I reached my door. Apartment 3B. I remember fumbling with the keys, the metal clinking loud in the hallway, hands clumsy with fatigue. Finally, the lock turned. The door opened. I stepped inside. And for a moment, everything seemed normal. The living room was dim, washed in the faint amber glow of a streetlight leaking through the blinds. My shoes tapped against the hardwood. The air smelled slightly different, though. Not the faint coffee and laundry scent of my own place, but something sharper. Cooking oil. Cigarettes, maybe. I shrugged it off. Hallway smells seep in sometimes. I dropped my bag on the table, sighed, and reached to switch on the light. The lamp wasn't there. My hand grasped empty air. I blinked, then looked properly. The table was there, yes, but bare. No lamp, no stack of unopened mail. I froze. My mind scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe I'd moved it. No. Maybe the landlord had come in for maintenance. Without telling me? No. I turned slowly, eyes adjusting. That was when I noticed the couch. It wasn't mine. Mine was a battered gray thing, thrifted in college, sagging in the middle. This couch was new. Firm, angular, dark blue fabric. A blanket I didn't recognize was draped neatly over the back. The room tilted around me. My throat went dry. I backed toward the door, pulse hammering. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle, the creak of weight on floorboards from deeper inside. Someone was home. I should have bolted. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But some terrible, Frozen curiosity rooted me in place. My mouth felt glued shut. "Hello?" I croaked. Silence. Then, deliberate footsteps, approaching. A figure emerged from the hallway. A man, maybe mid-40s, barefoot, wearing a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was thin, his face pale, eyes sunken but sharp. He stopped when he saw me, head tilting slightly. "You're early," he said. The words landed like ice water poured down my spine. I think I'm in the wrong place," I stammered, fumbling for the knob behind me. But he smiled faintly. "No, you're exactly where you should be." Every part of me screamed to get out. My fingers finally found the knob and twisted hard, but it wouldn't turn. My keys were still dangling in the lock on the outside. He must have locked it behind me when I came in. The man stepped closer. Not hurried, not aggressive. Just steady, like he knew I wouldn't get away. His eyes never blinked. "This is my apartment," I whispered, though the words sounded pathetic even to me. He chuckled softly, a dry rasp. "That's what they all say." Behind him, down the hallway, I glimpsed more of the space, walls painted a different color, furniture I didn't recognize, photographs hanging where mine should have been. Smiling faces. None mine. My mind raced, trying to reconcile it. Had I been so exhausted I walked into the wrong unit? But no, this was 3B. My number. My lock. My key. I pressed back against the door, every muscle taut. "I need to leave." He shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "Leave? You just got here." Then he reached into his pocket. Something metallic glinted. Adrenaline finally overrode shock. I lunged sideways, slamming into the table, knocking it over in a crash that echoed through the apartment. He moved quicker than I expected, blocking the path to the kitchen, but I darted toward the window instead. My fingers clawed at the blinds, ripping them down, fumbling at the latch. Too slow. His hand clamped onto my wrist, vice tight, twisting. I screamed, kicking back, catching him in the shin. He grunted but didn't let go. The metallic glint flashed again, a knife. In blind panic, I grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic vase from the windowsill, and smashed it against his head. The vase shattered, shards flying. He staggered, his grip loosening just enough. I tore free, dove for the door again. By sheer luck, the impact with the table had knocked my keys loose. They lay on the floor by the threshold. My fingers closed around them, trembling, jamming them desperately at the lock from the inside. He was coming, dragging the knife, blood trickling down the side of his head. The lock clicked. The door swung open. I hurled myself into the hallway, slamming the door behind me, and bolted down the stairs. I didn't stop until I burst onto the street, gasping, lungs burning. A couple walking their dog froze as I stumbled toward them, wild-eyed, babbling for help. They called the police. When officers arrived, I led them up, shaking. The door to 3B stood ajar, my keys still in the lock. But inside, the apartment was empty. Empty walls, bare floors, no furniture at all. Dust coated the surfaces like no one had lived there in months. I tried to explain, voice cracking, pointing at the shards of the vase, the table I'd knocked over, the blood I'd seen. But there was nothing. No shards. No overturned table. No blood. Just silence. They checked my actual apartment, 3C, 1 floor up. My furniture, my lamp, everything exactly as I'd left it. The officers exchanged looks, polite but doubtful. Exhaustion, they said. Stress. Maybe I'd mistaken the floor in my fatigue. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt, the grip on my wrist, the knife's glint, his words. "You're early." For weeks afterward, I avoided the stairwell, taking the elevator instead. I never passed 3B again. I never wanted to. Because sometimes, when I walk down the hall at night, I swear I hear movement behind that door. A creak of floorboards. The faintest laugh. And I know, with a cold certainty that never leaves me, he's still in there, waiting for me to come home early again. I never thought I'd be the kind of parent who loses track of their child. You hear those stories, the panic reports on the evening news, and you tell yourself you'd never let it happen. You'd hold their hand tight, you'd watch them like a hawk. But that night at the store, I learned how quickly ordinary life can twist into nightmare. It had been a normal Saturday. We needed groceries, and my daughter, Emily, begged to come along. She was 7, old enough to want to pick out her own cereal, too young to grasp the ways the world can break. The store was packed, the fluorescent lights glaring down on lines of weary shoppers. At first, it was mundane. We walked the aisles, filling the cart. Emily chattered about school, about a drawing she wanted to finish when we got home. She skipped a few steps ahead, tugged boxes from shelves, laughed when I put them back. I kept her close. I swear I did. In the produce section, I bent down to check tomatoes. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. When I straightened, the cart was there, but Emily wasn't. At first I wasn't alarmed. She was curious. Maybe she wandered to the next aisle. I called her name, voice light, playful. No answer. I checked the end of the aisle. Nothing. My chest tightened. I left the cart and began moving faster, scanning faces, calling louder. Heads turned. Shoppers frowned. But no one saw her. Within minutes, panic set in. My voice cracked as I shouted her name. A store employee hurried over, asked what was wrong. I explained, words tumbling, throat dry. They radioed security. An announcement went over the PA. If anyone sees a young girl, brown hair, red jacket, please bring her to the front. People glanced around uneasily. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called my husband, my voice a broken whisper. Emily's gone. Security led me to a small office in the back, walls lined with monitors showing grainy feeds from cameras. My pulse thundered in my ears. They rewound the footage. There she was, clear as day, Emily in her red jacket, walking toward the side exit near the frozen foods. Relief surged. I'd find her there. But then the frame shifted, and I saw something that made my skin crawl. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her. Tall, dark coat, a baseball cap pulled low. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. She wasn't struggling, but her steps looked small, hesitant. I lurched forward. That's her. That's my daughter. Who is that man? The guard frowned. Do you recognize him? No. No, I've never seen him before. They froze the frame, zoomed in. His face was blurred by the brim of his cap, the camera's resolution too low to sharpen it. But his hand, pale, bony fingers curved like claws on her shoulder, made bile rise in my throat. The guard checked the timestamp. This was 5 minutes ago. I ran. I don't remember how I got outside, only the slam of cold night air against my face. The side exit opened onto a half-empty parking lot, shadows pooling between the cars. I screamed her name until my throat tore. No answer. No small figure in a red jacket. The police came. I barely remember what I said, Just fragments, red jacket, 7 years old, man in a cap. My husband arrived, wild-eyed, demanding answers I didn't have. Officers combed the lot, questioned employees, checked receipts and timestamps. Then one of them returned, face pale. "They're not on any other cameras," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We have her going out the exit with him." He gestured helplessly. "But she never shows up again. Not in the parking lot cameras. Not at the front. It's like they walked out and disappeared." I couldn't process it. Cameras don't lie. People don't just vanish. But that was what the footage showed. Frame by frame, Emily and the man walking toward the door. He opened it. She glanced back once, her eyes wide, uncertain. Then the door closed behind them. The next camera, outside? Empty lot. I demanded they check again, rewind, enhance. They did. Again and again. Nothing. The door opened. Then nothing. Hours blurred. Police lights strobed the lot. Officers canvassed, questioned shoppers, pulled up vehicle registrations. My husband clutched my hand like a lifeline, but his eyes looked hollow. At 3 a.m., an officer entered with a USB drive. "We've isolated the footage," he said. "You should see this." We gathered around the monitor. The video played again, Emily, the man, the exit. Then the feed glitched, just for a second. A flicker of static, a distortion of the frame. And in that distortion, his face turned toward the camera. I can still see it. Not blurred, not hidden. Perfectly clear. A face too pale, stretched too long, eyes black as pits. A smile that split his jaw unnaturally wide, teeth sharp, too many. He looked straight into the lens, straight at us. Then the glitch ended, and the frame was normal again. The officer stopped the playback, his knuckles white. "We're still trying to understand this," he muttered. But I understood. On some instinctive, primal level, I knew. That thing wasn't a man. And Emily, my daughter, had walked out the door with it. The footage ended there. No cars leaving, no figures crossing the lot. Just an empty exit door swinging shut. The case is still open. The police call it an abduction, though they can't explain the footage. My husband clings to the hope she'll be found. Flyers went up, news segments aired, volunteers searched. But I know the truth. I saw her face in that last glance at the camera. She knew something was wrong. She knew, but she went anyway, small hand caught in the grip of something that wasn't human. And she's gone. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the store. I dream of the static glitch, the face turning toward me. And in the dream, it speaks. "You looked away." And when I wake, I swear I hear a child's voice in the hall outside our apartment, calling softly, as if asking me to follow. But it's not Emily's voice anymore. I always hated working late, but that night it couldn't be avoided. Quarter-end reports, endless spreadsheets. By the time I looked up from my monitor, the office floor was empty. The cubicles that usually buzzed with chatter had gone silent hours earlier. I stretched, rubbed my eyes, and checked the time. 11:47 p.m. My reflection in the monitor looked pale and hollow, more ghost than person. I packed up quickly, shoving papers into my bag. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too sterile. I told myself I'd be home in 20 minutes if I hurried. I rode the elevator down to the lobby. The building was one of those modern high-rises, glass and steel, 30 floors, always over-air-conditioned. At night, though, It felt cavernous. The lobby stretched wide and empty, marble floors gleaming under recessed lights. I pushed through the glass doors leading to the street. They didn't budge. At first, I thought I hadn't pushed hard enough. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it. The doors rattled but stayed locked. A chain, thick and silver, was looped tightly through the handles, secured with a heavy padlock. My stomach dropped. I turned back inside. Maybe I'd missed the side exit. The building had multiple ways out. I hurried past the front desk, my footsteps echoing too loud, and headed toward the west corridor. The emergency exit door loomed at the end. Red letters read exit. It was chained, too. The padlock gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, solid, unbreakable. A prickling unease crept into me. This had to be a mistake. Security must have chained them after hours and forgotten I was inside. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the overnight guard. No service. The screen displayed a hollow no signal. I swallowed hard. The lobby suddenly felt too big, too empty. I made for the security desk. The monitors glowed in a row, showing grainy black and white feeds of hallways and stairwells. The chair was empty. No guard. Hello? My voice cracked, too loud in the stillness. No reply. I checked the monitors again. At first, the footage looked normal, just deserted halls, stairwells, elevators. Then I noticed one feed. Floor 12. A figure stood in the hallway. I leaned closer. The image was fuzzy, but it was definitely someone, tall, still, dressed in dark clothing. They weren't moving, just facing the camera. Their head tilted slightly, as though they knew I was watching. My chest tightened. It could have been a janitor, I told myself. A coworker pulling a late night like me. That was rational. But something in the way they stood, utterly motionless, staring, made my skin crawl. I tore my eyes away and grabbed the phone at the desk. Deadline. The elevator dinged softly behind me. I spun. The doors slid open. Empty. I backed away slowly. The button panel beside it glowed faintly. Floor 12. My throat went dry. Someone had called it from above. I bolted for the stairwell door, tugged it open, and started down. I'd find the basement exit, maybe a service tunnel. Anything. My footsteps thundered on the concrete steps, the echo chasing me. After 3 flights, I slowed, listening. Another set of footsteps echoed below. Not mine. They were measured, deliberate, one step at a time. I froze, straining to hear. The sound stopped when I did. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned and ran back up, 2 steps at a time, lungs burning. I shoved through the first door I found, floor 15, and stumbled into the hallway. Deserted cubicles stretched before me. Computers dark, chairs pushed back, the whole floor abandoned. Except for one cubicle. Its monitor glowed faintly, casting a pale light across the desk. The screen showed the same grainy security feed I'd seen downstairs. Floor 15. And on it, in stark black and white, was me standing in that very cubicle, staring at the monitor. My stomach lurched. I spun in place, scanning the room. Empty. Yet the camera had me framed perfectly, as though someone were watching right now. A sound rose in the distance, chains rattling. I backed away, heart pounding. I needed out. I needed air. I ran for the far stairwell, burst through the door, and barreled downward. My legs ached, my breath ragged. At last, the ground floor. I shoved through the door into the lobby again. The front exit stood before me, chains still looped through the handles. But the padlock was gone. The chains hung loose, draped across the doors like discarded jewelry. Relief surged. I shoved the doors open and stumbled into the night air. The city stretched before me, neon lights, distant traffic, people moving along the sidewalks. Life. Safety. I staggered forward, bent double, sucking in air. My phone buzzed in my pocket, signal restored. I pulled it out with shaking hands, ready to call my husband, the police, anyone. But the screen wasn't my home screen. It was a live video feed. Grainy, black and white. Of me. Standing outside the building, hunched over my phone, glancing around like a trapped animal. I dropped it, heart hammering. The screen cracked against the sidewalk but still glowed, still streamed my every move from some unseen camera. I turned back toward the building. The glass facade reflected the streetlights, towering 30 stories high. Behind the glass, in the dark lobby, a figure stood. Tall. Still. Watching. Its head tilted slowly, like before. I backed away, eyes fixed on that shape, until the crowd swallowed me. I didn't stop until I was blocks away, phone abandoned, lungs burning. But even now, nights later, I feel it. The camera's eye, following. The faint rattle of chains. The certainty that I never really left that building. That I'm still being watched. I'd been driving longer than I should have. The highway stretched black and endless under my headlights, trees looming like a wall on either side. Midnight radio chatter kept me company, static, half-played songs, a lonely voice announcing road conditions no one seemed to hear. I was an hour from home, yawning, fingers clenched around the wheel. The road had been empty for miles when the red and blue lights suddenly flared in my rearview mirror. Relief hit first. I wasn't speeding, but the sight of another human presence in the middle of nowhere felt like salvation. Then unease followed. I hadn't noticed a car behind me. Not once in the last 30 minutes. Where had they come from? Still, I pulled to the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The cruiser stopped behind me. Lights kept strobing, painting the trees in violent flashes. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a dark uniform, hat pulled low. In one hand, a flashlight, in the other, something he held up briefly, a badge, glinting in the beam. I cracked the window. Cold night air slithered in. "Evening," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "License and registration." I fumbled for my wallet, heart pounding louder than reason demanded. Something about him wasn't right. The uniform seemed generic, the kind you could order online. No patches, no nameplate. Just dark fabric. I handed him my license. He glanced at it, barely shining the flashlight over the plastic before slipping it into his pocket. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. The words landed heavy, final. My grip tightened on the wheel. "What's the problem, officer?" His smile stretched too wide, too white under the strobing lights. "Just routine. Step out of the vehicle." A dozen rational thoughts collided. Maybe state troopers here had different uniforms. Maybe he was undercover. Maybe I was paranoid from lack of sleep. Yet every instinct screamed wrong. The way he stood, too still. The way the badge had caught the light for only a second, never close enough for me to see detail. I swallowed. I'd rather stay inside until I understand what's going on. His flashlight beam swept directly into my face, blinding me. Yet, out of the car. The edge in his voice turned my stomach. I forced calm into mine. I'll call dispatch to confirm. Just a second. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Not even a flicker of bars. When my eyes adjusted to the light again, he was closer. His hand rested on the edge of my window, fingers pale and long. Too long. Something in me broke. I slammed the car into gear and floored it. Tires screeched, gravel spat, the sudden thrust nearly sending me into the ditch. For a moment, the mirror showed him standing exactly where I'd left him, light strobing over his face. Then the cruiser's lights flared again and swung onto the road behind me. He was chasing me. The highway twisted black ahead, trees pressing close. My speed climbed 70, 80, 90. The cruiser clung to me like a shadow, lights pulsing but sirens silent. Always silent. I risked a glance back. The driver's seat was empty. No one behind the wheel. Yet the car stayed perfectly centered, perfectly steady, lights blinding. My breath hitched. My hands slipped slick with sweat on the wheel. I drove faster, pushing the engine to its limits. The road blurred, my headlights slicing tunnels through dark. And then another set of lights appeared ahead. Blue and red, steady and professional, growing brighter. An actual patrol car. I nearly sobbed with relief. I slowed as it approached, both vehicles stopping nose to nose on the empty highway. The real officer stepped out, uniform crisp, patches visible, voice authoritative. "You all right, sir?" he called. I stumbled from the car, knees weak. I pointed behind me. That cruiser, it pulled me over. The officer, he wasn't. I turned. The highway behind us was empty. No lights. No cruiser. No one. The real officer frowned. "What cruiser?" My words tumbled out. The badge, the order to step out, the chase. I sounded insane even to myself. He listened, eyes narrowing, one hand near his radio. When I finished, silence pressed in. Only wind in the trees. Finally he said, "You're not the first." The blood drained from my face. "What do you mean?" He glanced at the woods. His jaw tightened. "We've had reports like this. People being pulled over at night, always out here. Always someone flashing lights, showing a badge that isn't right. Half the time folks say they never even saw a face. Some just vanish." He fixed me with a hard stare. "You're lucky you didn't get out of your car." My knees nearly buckled. The night air felt colder, the darkness thicker. He escorted me to my car, radio dispatch, then followed me until we reached the next lit town. When I finally parked in a gas station lot, under buzzing fluorescent lights, I shook so hard I could barely put the car in park. I never saw the fake cruiser again. But every time I drive that stretch of highway, I watch the mirrors, heart thundering. I know what I saw. And I know if I'd opened that door, if I'd stepped onto the pavement like he wanted, I would never have come back. I woke slowly, as though swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. My tongue was heavy, my throat raw, my limbs distant and numb. Bright light pressed against my eyelids. Surgery. That was my first thought. I had gone in for a routine outpatient procedure, nothing serious. A minor thing. I remembered signing forms, the cold sting of antiseptic on my arm, the anesthesiologist telling me to count backwards. But I wasn't in recovery. When I opened my eyes, I was in a room I didn't recognize. White walls, ceiling too low, fluorescent tubes buzzing faintly. No window. A single door with no handle on my side. And restraints. Thick leather straps bound my wrists to the sides of the bed, another across my chest, one at my ankles. Panic flared, cutting through the drugged haze. My breath came fast and shallow. Hello? Hey. Is anyone there? The door opened. A nurse entered, her shoes squeaking on the tile. She wore pale blue scrubs and a plastic badge, though I couldn't read her name from where I lay. Her expression was calm, professional. You're awake, she said, checking a clipboard. How are you feeling? Where am I? My voice was hoarse. Why am I tied down? You have the wrong person. I had a procedure today at St. Mary's. My name is... She cut me off smoothly. Let's not get agitated, Martin. I froze. What did you call me? Martin, she repeated, as though it were obvious. That's your name. You know that. No, I shook my head, the strap across my chest biting into me. That's not my name. You have me mixed up with someone else. Please, call my wife. She's probably waiting. The nurse's face softened in a way that felt rehearsed. We've been through this before, Martin. Delusions are common after trauma. It's all right. You're safe here. Her words chilled me more than the restraints. Delusions. Safe here. She spoke with the finality of someone correcting a child, not a mistake. I'm not Martin. My voice cracked. I can tell you my address, my job, my... Rest, she said, adjusting something on the 4 line. A cool flush slid into my veins. You'll feel better soon. The edges of my vision blurred. My protests thinned into silence. When I woke again, time had twisted. Hours. A day. The fluorescent lights hummed the same. 2 men in white coats stood by the bed. Doctors, maybe. Their faces carried the professional detachment that was worse than cruelty. Good morning, Martin, one said. I wanted to scream. Instead, I rasped, that's not my name. They exchanged a look. One scribbled notes. The other leaned closer. Do you remember what happened the night of the accident? I blinked at him. What accident? I came in for surgery. Another look between them. More notes. They left without explanation. Time bled strangely in that place. Meals came on trays, tasteless mush, plastic cups of water. Sometimes I woke to find new bruises on my arms where they'd drawn blood without rousing me. Cameras watched from the ceiling, their tiny red dots unblinking. Each staff member called me Martin. They spoke to me as though I'd lived a whole other life. Questions about my outbursts, reminders about the fire, reassurances that I was finally stable. I clung to details of my real life, repeating them like prayer. My name, my wife's face, the color of our front door, the smell of our coffee pot in the morning. If I let those details slip, even for a moment, I feared they would vanish forever. I tried bargaining, begging, threatening. Every response was the same calm deflection. You're confused, Martin. This is part of your recovery. But recovery from what? One night, I woke to the sound of whispered voices outside my door. I strained against the straps, turning my head just enough to catch fragments. Still insists he's someone else. Progress, but slow. Identity fracture, might never. The door creaked. The nurse entered, syringe in hand. She didn't notice my eyes were open until I spoke. What did you do to me? I hissed. She jumped slightly, then composed herself. Nothing, Martin. We're helping you. I thrashed against the restraints. Stop calling me that. Her expression hardened. Martin, you killed 3 people in that fire. You've blocked it out, but deep down, you know. This is why you're here. To keep you and everyone else safe. Her words carved into me like glass. I stared at her, searching for some flicker of humor, some hint this was a grotesque mistake. But her face was stone. The needle slid into my arm before I could scream. The next time I woke, there was a mirror on the opposite wall. Large, silvered glass. I hadn't seen it before. I blinked at my reflection and my breath stopped. The face staring back wasn't mine. The hair was shorter, darker. The jaw broader. The eyes sunken, unfamiliar. A stranger's face, strapped to the bed where I lay. No, my voice broke. That's not me. That's not me. Footsteps echoed. The doctors returned. Do you recognize yourself today, Martin? One asked. I shook my head violently, tears burning. That's not me. It's not me. But as I watched, the reflection's lips curved into a smile I hadn't made. And suddenly, horribly, I understood. Maybe I had gone in for surgery. Maybe I had been someone else. But whatever this place was, whatever they had done, my identity had been peeled away like a mask. The man I had been was gone, erased, overridden by the face in the glass. And the worst part was that I couldn't hold on to the details anymore. My wife's name slipped first. Then my address. Then my job. Each memory dissolved like ash in water, leaving only fragments. Only Martin remained. By the time they unstrapped me, I no longer protested. I answered to the name. I walked the halls when they allowed it, silent under the watchful cameras. I ate when they told me, swallowed pills without question. Because fighting meant nothing. The face in the mirror had won. I don't remember who I was before. I only know that someone else lived my life, someone I can no longer picture. Now I am Martin. And I am exactly who they always said I was. When we bought the house, I thought we'd finally done it. We'd escaped the cramped apartment, the noisy neighbors, the paper-thin walls. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. 2 floors, a patch of yard, and, as the realtor boasted, tons of storage space. The attic was a selling point for me. I pictured cardboard boxes neatly stacked, Christmas decorations tucked away, maybe a reading corner if we ever finished it. But the attic was also where everything started. The move-in day was ordinary enough, dust in our throats, the thud of boxes, laughter over which light switches controlled which outlets. My wife, Sarah, insisted we explore every corner right away. When we pulled down the stiff attic ladder, it groaned as though it hadn't been touched in years. The attic smelled of dry wood and mothballs. Slanted beams cut shadows across the floor. At the far end, against the wall, sat a collection of old boxes, stacked neatly 3 high. They left junk, Sarah said, brushing dust off her jeans. Previous owners probably forgot, I answered, though the neatness struck me as deliberate, not forgotten. We opened one box out of curiosity. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, bundled with twine. The first one made me laugh nervously. It was me sitting on a bench in the park near our old apartment. My head tilted down, a coffee cup in hand. Look, I said, showing Sarah. Someone had the same cup as mine. She stared, her mouth a thin line. That's not someone. That's you. The next photo was Sarah, browsing in the corner store. She was holding an apple, mid-smile. We sifted faster, our hands clumsy. Every photograph was of us walking to work, buying groceries, sitting at cafes, even standing at our old bus stop. Years of us. My throat dried as I realized none of these could have been taken by us or anyone we knew. The angles were always distant, sometimes across the street, sometimes from behind glass. In every single one, we were unaware. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah whispered. I tied the bundle back together and shoved it in the box, suddenly desperate to close it away. Maybe it's a prank. Maybe someone printed stuff from our social media. "Some of these are from before we even met," she said, her voice sharp. She held up one, her as a teenager, standing outside her high school. Grainy, but unmistakably her. We didn't open the other boxes that day. We tried to rationalize. Maybe the photos were staged. Maybe a stalker had lived here before. But whose? Hers? Mine? Both? That night, we barely spoke. Every creak of the house felt alive, as though something waited above us in the attic. I told myself I'd throw the boxes out in the morning. But in the morning, the boxes weren't there. I climbed the attic ladder, heart hammering. The floor was bare except for dust and a few dead insects. When I told Sarah, she shook her head hard. "Don't joke. Not about this." "I'm not joking." She insisted on seeing for herself. When she came down again, she looked pale, her lips trembling. "They're gone." We tried to convince each other it was exhaustion, stress from the move. Maybe we carried them down and misplaced them. But both of us knew we hadn't touched them. The next discovery came 2 nights later. Sarah opened the kitchen cupboard to put away dishes and screamed. I ran in. Inside the cupboard, stacked neatly where plates should have been, were photographs. Our photographs. One was of me, standing at the sink in our new kitchen. Taken yesterday, judging by my shirt. Another showed Sarah asleep in our bed. Her hands shook as she flipped through them. Every picture was of us in this house. Someone was taking them. Now. We scoured the place, closets, crawl spaces, even under floorboards. Nothing. I called the police, but the officer barely looked at the photos before asking if we had enemies, prankster friends, exes. He left with a promise to look into it. That night, neither of us slept. The days blurred. The photos kept appearing. In the fridge. Under pillows. Inside the mailbox. Always recent. Always of us. We stopped opening them, just shoved them into trash bags and hauled them outside. But each morning, more would appear. Sarah began crying at random moments. I caught myself staring at corners of rooms, expecting a lens to glint. We taped over outlets, covered mirrors, unplugged appliances. None of it mattered. The photos kept coming. One evening, Sarah wasn't in the living room where I left her. I searched every room, calling her name until I climbed the attic ladder. She was there, standing rigid, staring at the far wall. The boxes were back. This time, they were open. Hundreds of photographs spilled across the attic floor, overlapping like scales. They were all of Sarah. Not me, only her. From birth to now. Cradle to present day. School photos, hospital records, moments that no one should have captured. Sarah whispered, "It's like they've been watching me forever." Her voice cracked. Why me? I didn't know how to answer. That night, I dreamed of someone standing at the foot of our bed, clicking a shutter, over and over. I woke to the sound of it, click, click, click. The room was dark, but I saw a shape retreat into the hall. I lunged, but the hall was empty. On the floor outside the door lay a fresh photograph. It showed me, mid-lunge, face twisted in fear. I wanted to leave. Sell the house, burn it down, anything. But when we packed, the photos multiplied faster. Boxes filled themselves with images. The car trunk overflowed with them. The last straw was when I picked up a photo and it was blank, just empty living room floor. I blinked, and a second later, an image faded into view, me, staring at the photograph itself. Sarah screamed that we couldn't run. That it was already inside us, part of us. I told her we had to try. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to silence. Sarah was gone. I searched every room, attic, basement. Nothing. Just photos. Hundreds of them, spread neatly on the bed where she should have been. The top one showed her standing in the attic, surrounded by photographs. Another showed her turning, looking into the camera. And the last showed her vanishing into shadow. Now I'm alone in the house. The photos keep coming, but they're all of me. Every second I live is captured, printed, stacked. I've stopped throwing them away. There's no point. Tonight I found one I shouldn't have been able to. It was of me tomorrow. Sitting here. Head in my hands. Eyes hollow. And behind me, in the photograph, someone else is standing. I can't see their face. But I know they're in the house. And I know it's only a matter of time before I join Sarah wherever she went. I always thought camping would bring peace, quiet nights under the stars, the kind of stillness you couldn't find in the city. That was what I told myself as we drove out to the state forest, car packed with sleeping bags, instant noodles, and too much trail mix. There were 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Anna, and our friends Marcus and Dylan. We'd chosen a spot well off the trail, close to the river. By dusk, the fire was crackling, laughter rising with the sparks. It felt safe. Ordinary. When we finally turned in, I lay in the tent listening to the water and Anna's slow breathing. The canvas walls glowed faint orange from the dying embers outside. I drifted off believing the woods belonged to us. I woke to silence. Not the gentle hush of night, but something heavier, expectant. The fire was out. The tent was cold. Anna stirred beside me. "What time is it?" she mumbled. I reached for my phone. My hand brushed empty nylon. I patted harder. No phone. No backpack. No shoes. "Where's our stuff?" I whispered. We unzipped the flap. The clearing looked wrong in the pale moonlight, emptier. Marcus's and Dylan's tent was still there, but everything else was gone. The food bags we'd hung in the tree, gone. The cooler, gone. Even the lanterns. I stepped onto the dirt barefoot, the chill biting. That was when I saw them. Footprints. A single line of them pressed into the earth, circling our tent in a wide ring. They were bare, the toes splayed, deep impressions in the damp soil. Anna gasped. "Where are Marcus and Dylan?" We hurried to their tent. The flap hung open, the inside empty. Their sleeping bags were flattened, abandoned. No note. No voices in the trees. Just the ash of water and the ring of prints around us. Rational explanations tripped over themselves. Maybe raccoons stole the food. Maybe the guys went for a night hike. But the prints, they weren't ours. Too big for Anna, too narrow for me. Just one set, circling again and again, as though whoever it was had walked around us for hours. We called their names until our throats burned. The forest swallowed our voices. Anna grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." barefoot? My voice shook. In the dark? She looked at the prints, then at me. I don't care. We followed the trail back toward the road, the ground littering our feet with sharp stones and pine needles. Every sound seemed magnified, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. I kept glancing behind, half expecting to see someone stepping into the moonlight. We walked for what felt like hours, but the trail never ended. The river still rushed beside us, constant, unchanging. My feet bled, toes raw, but we didn't dare stop. At last, Anna whispered, "Look." Ahead, in the path's pale dust, was a footprint. Bare, damp, freshly pressed. Then another. And another. A single set, leading forward. We followed them, afraid not to, until Anna suddenly froze. "They're ours." I looked closer. She was right. The prints matched mine, heel cracked, second toe crooked. Perfect copies, marching into the darkness. We turned back. More prints behind us now, appearing where we'd walked. Each step we took was shadowed by another, not quite ours, but close. By dawn, we stumbled into the clearing again. Our tents stood exactly where we left them, as though we had never left. The cooler sat by the fire pit, packed with food. My phone lay on top, battery full. But Marcus and Dylan were still gone. Anna picked up my phone with shaking hands. "Call someone. Please." I dialed 911. The ring buzzed loud in my ear. Then a click. Silence. And breathing. Slow, deliberate, not mine. I threw the phone down. It buzzed against the dirt, screen flashing. A new photo filled it. Me and Anna, standing in the clearing. Taken just seconds ago. We didn't pack. We didn't speak. We just ran. Through brambles and mud, deeper into the trees, anything to get away. But the footprints followed. Always just one set, always circling back, hurting us. When we collapsed in exhaustion, the forest had changed. The trees leaned close, the trail lost. No matter which direction we tried, the ground was already marked, prints pressed ahead of us, waiting. Anna cried softly. "It's playing with us." I couldn't argue. Night fell again. We huddled together, shivering, too afraid to sleep. I tried to count the seconds between the forest noises. But there were none. Only silence. Then the circling began. Soft, deliberate steps pressing into the soil around us. 1, 2, 3. Anna clutched my arm. "Don't look." But I did. In the moonlight, a figure walked barefoot in slow circles. Skin pale as bark, limbs too long, head tilted as though listening. Each time it passed, the air grew colder. It never looked at me. Not directly. But I knew it would, eventually. I don't know when Anna vanished. One moment she was beside me, her nails digging into my skin. The next, my arm was empty. I shouted until my throat bled. The footsteps never broke rhythm. Round and round. When dawn came, I was alone. I am still here, writing this in the dirt with a stick, words carved into the ground as though it might matter. My phone is gone. The food is gone. Even my shoes, though I can't remember if I ever had them. The circle of prints tightens each night. Soon, it will step inside. And when it does, I think I will vanish too, like Anna, like Marcus and Dylan, leaving nothing but footprints. I had rehearsed the meeting a dozen times in my head, what to wear, the harmless opening line, the joke he liked in his last message. We'd matched on a slow Tuesday evening. His profile was good in the way photographs are good when someone has taken them of themselves and looked pleased. A crooked smile in front of a river, a guitar slung across his back, a bookshelf in the background arranged with neat spines. He wrote with small, particular jokes, and when he suggested coffee I said yes. The cafe smelled exactly as it should: warm milk, citrus cleaner on the counter, the low burn of beans. It was mid-afternoon, sunlight soft through the front windows, and I had the perfect table by the glass. I checked my phone twice, then 3 times, until I saw him through the door, taller than his photos, jeans and a jacket, hair mussed by the wind. Relief hit like heat. He introduced himself the way his profile had: Eli, then that same crooked smile. His voice fit the photographs. He ordered water, then sat, hands warm when we shook. The first half hour was a string of the ordinary: talk about work, small talk about movies, tearful laughter. I watched the way his eyes moved when he listened. He asked about my job, my sister's wedding next month, the coffee I always preferred. Everything matched what we'd messaged. I told myself to relax. But there were small wrongnesses, little frayed threads I tried to will away. He never asked the follow-up questions most people did. He reused phrases I'd written in my bio as if he'd been rehearsing them. When I mentioned a band I liked, he said, "Right, that's your thing," in a tone that suggested he'd decided it was. He checked his watch twice in a way that seemed choreographed. He never touched his phone. He let my conversation happen around him, like a listener studying a script. I told myself he might be shy. I told myself he might be socialized oddly. I told myself 100 small, reasonable things until the reasonable things crumbled. When he suggested a walk, the sky had moved from soft afternoon to the thin blue of evening. The street outside smelled of rain and hot asphalt. We left the cafe and walked along a row of closed shops, the city locked down in that saccharine smallness that comes after sun. He kept pace with me, shoulder nearly brushing mine. He mentioned a place he liked to show people, and, because it was only a few blocks, I agreed. The alley he led me down smelled of damp cardboard. Doors were shuttered, neon flickers throwing slats of light across dumpster lids. He stopped at a gate and leaned against it as if we were sharing a private joke. "Do you want to come up?" he asked. Something in my mouth went dry. "Up where?" "My place," he said, easy. "It's just around the corner. It's nicer than this." We had been texting for days. I had no reason to feel alarmed in that way, no concrete reason, but my heart kept saying the same stupid animal thing: not right. I started to say no, to laugh it off, to suggest another coffee or a movie, and then he moved closer with a hand on the small of my back and the air around me changed. The hand was possessive, the sort of possession that arrives like a weight and never announces itself. "Let's go," he said. The voice had that same practiced cadence. He sounded disappointed that I didn't leap forward. I stepped back. "I think I'll head home." He smiled in a way that made the alley feel smaller. "You can't leave yet." The rational me argued that he didn't have the energy for violence, that public places and witnesses existed, that someone having an odd, intense social style did not equal danger. The animal me, the one with the throat and the small, clean panic in it, said get out. I turned to walk back toward the street. He reached to block me with his forearm. "You're being rude," he said. "We've had a good time." His fingers were longer than they needed to be, the knuckles pale. I didn't scream. I didn't ask how it had come to this. I picked up my pace, pushed against his arm, and his hand tightened. That was when the idiot human in me, a part one I'm not proud of now, tried reason one more time. "Listen, Eli, I don't want to be weird, but you're different from your pictures. Are those really yours?" His face changed, subtly. A flash of blankness. He let go of me as if the question had smoothed him out. "Yeah," he said. "They're mine." When I said the name out loud, the assurance had thinned. I slipped my phone out under the pretense of calling someone and, stunned, saw that I had no bars. My thumb hovered above the call icon. Then he lunged, grabbing my wrist and twisting it behind my back. I screamed. He murmured something I couldn't hear. People on the other side of the street looked up and then away. City indifference is a dangerous thing. He dragged me toward a recessed doorway. He was stronger than he seemed. "Stop!" I shouted, yanking free, tasting metal and fear. The alley felt like a throat. He laughed softly, and the laugh didn't match the face in his photos. In the struggle, I remembered a trivial detail from our messages. He'd once joked about always leaving his wallet at home. It had felt like flirtation then. As we scuffled, his jacket slid open and something slipped from his pocket and skittered across the pavement, a folded prescription slip and an old man's business card that did not have his name. When I snatched it, my fingers closed on its glossy edge and I saw a URL typed in tiny font. I should have fled with it. Instead, I shoved it into my pocket like a talisman and, without thinking, dialed 911. No bars. I called my sister in a blind roll and the line tapped through, then connected. It was luck. A cab idled by the corner and the driver, seeing the commotion, leaned out and shouted something. The moment stretched, the man's hand faltered, and I ran. I ran down the street, lungs burning, calling my sister again, and this time I made it to the well-lit cafe where other people sat with laptops open, where my voice finally had witnesses. He was not far behind. He stood at the curb, watching me with a careful expression, as if he owned a script and was waiting for his cue. I told the barista to call the police. I kept my eyes on him until the sirens cut across the night. He stepped back like a shadow dissolving, lifted one hand in a slow, polite wave, and walked away down the block, hands in his pockets, head forward. The officers arrived minutes later. I showed them the card, the prescription, my torn sleeve. They took my statement, the inquiry clinical and brisk. A patrolman said they would canvass CCTV, check the cafe cameras, trace the card. I sat on the curb and shook until my teeth ached. 2 days later, I spoke to Detective Harmon in a dim precinct room. He had watched the cafe footage and a grainy shot from a bakery camera where the man's jacket had brushed against a delivery van. A number on a receipt matched a payment on a contactless card recovered from the alley. The business card led to a fake business. The prescription belonged to a man who existed but who had never lived in our city, one Eli Parker, a photographer with a portfolio that looked uncannily like the profile photos the man had used. He lived 3 states away and had reported images stolen months earlier. His social accounts had comments from people in other cities, bewildered to find him showing up on dating sites. Harmon tapped a file. "We ran facial recognition on the footage," he said. "It matches a man arrested last year for passport fraud in another state. He uses other people's faces. Different names. He creates lives out of strangers' social accounts, then meets women, sometimes robs them, sometimes worse. We think he works a pattern." They found him 3 days later. He was trying the same profile on a woman at a different cafe. He had another wallet, another card, another prescription. When they took him in, his face was flat and unremarkable, a human-made thing stitched together from other people's smiles. Under interrogation, he didn't confess to violence. The detective said later he typed easily, like someone copying text from a book, admitting to identity theft in a voice that sounded practiced. They charged him with attempted kidnapping, multiple counts of identity theft, fraud. The real Eli Parker's accounts were restored. He made a short statement on the photographer forum, bewildered and grateful, posting a picture of his own passport and a gentle note, "Had my face used." Scary. Hope you're okay." I felt, more than anything, oddly guilty, like a character in someone else's story freed. I never met him again. I deleted the dating profile, changed habits, sat in brighter places, let others accompany me to my car. The photographs that had been so charming became sinister proof in an evidence packet, a face that belonged to a man who had been made from other men. In the end, the horror was banal and bureaucratic: ID numbers, receipts, the slow grinding of a legal system, but it was real. The man who wore Eli's face behind a coffee cup was in a cell. The person whose images he'd stolen existed and was relieved. And I, who had almost been turned into an anecdote for his collection, kept my phone locked, my routes changed, my appetite for small online romances extinguished. The last thing Detective Harmon told me before we left the station was flat and practical. He used someone else's life so he could try on other people. We won't know the full list till we comb through devices. But you did the right thing, left, called, kept the card. You made it stop. I sleep with lights on now. When I scroll through pictures, my fingers hover, wary. If horror has a true face, I learned that night it can be borrowed, cheapened, and given briefly to a man who thinks an identity is just another prop. The only definitive consolation is the lock on my phone and the knowledge that the man who was not Eli was in a cell with someone else's face pressed against the concrete. The suburb always looked harmless at night: rows of beige houses with sleep-soft porches, a single lamp burning like a small honest eye. That's what made this sound stand out the first time: a heavy dragging, slow and periodic, like someone hauling a mattress across gravel. It came at 3 in the morning, always, for weeks. I'd lie awake and listen, counting the beats on the roof like a metronome. My wife, Jenna, pretended not to hear. Our daughter slept between us. The sound was a private nuisance I hadn't known how to voice. By the third night I started watching the window. There was a rhythm to it. At 2:58 a.m., the house 2 doors down, Mr. Caldwell's, would go dark. At 3 a.m., he would be at his front porch in a faded flannel and a quilted jacket, shoulders rounded, knees bent in a way that looked practiced. He'd set 2 black trash bags by the stoop and drag them, one after the other, along the curb. The straps cut little arcs in the asphalt. Sometimes he muttered, sometimes he hummed off-key. He never turned a light on. He never waved to anyone. He never, in the months I had known him, looked like that. By day, during our block BBQs, he was the model neighbor, grilling for the kids, bringing casseroles for school drives. That contradiction, the daytime civility and the midnight animal, grew inside me until curiosity wasn't a sin but a pressure. "Might be raccoons," Jenna said when I mentioned it quietly over coffee. "Or a couch he's throwing out." "He does it every single night," I said. At the same minute, our daughter began to ask if we were spies. We told her no. Then, one Friday, she fell asleep earlier and we told each other we'd just step outside and look. No flashlights, no phones, see and be back. It sounded, frankly, stupid and tame. It also felt like an obligation. We slipped into the night wearing slippers, the porch light a small island behind us. The air smelt of cut grass and something sweeter, jasmine in the neighbor's yard. The clock face on the church 2 blocks over read 2:57. We crouched behind an overturned potted plant and waited. Our breath fogged. At 3 o'clock, like a cue, his door opened. Caldwell moved the same way I'd seen in daylight, slowly, as if he were careful of his joints, but the bags were terrible in the way they sagged. He didn't toss them into a bin or place them for pickup. He hauled them to the curb and, after a moment, opened one. I should have looked away. Curiosity is a small animal with sharp teeth. I leaned forward until a cold spray of asphalt pressed at my knees. Inside, stacked and folded with an absurd domestic neatness, was a child's jacket, pink, tiny, with a cartoon fox and a bundle of photographs tied with twine. He set the jacket aside, reached for the twine, and untied the bundle with fingers that did not tremble. My breath got thin. I saw, before I realized I'd seen them, a photograph, the same child I'd seen at the park last summer, the small boy from the cul-de-sac with cheeks like dough, smiling at a sprinkler. Another photo showed an adult woman in a red coat, hands in her pockets, standing at the library bus stop. They were not arranged as macabre trophies, twisted for display. They were folded and stacked like someone putting away laundry. Caldwell peered at each one like a man checking a list. "God," Jenna whispered. He hummed to himself and then zipped the bag closed, the zipper wiping across shadows. He lifted the second bag with a grunt and dragged it to the curb in the same small, methodical steps. This time I saw the outline through the plastic, something long and clumped, darker than fabric. He shifted it awkwardly as if balancing the weight by the way a butcher balances meat. He dragged both bags further down, toward the storm drain at the corner. "That's not garbage," I breathed. We followed, hearts loud and clumsy. He moved slowly enough that we kept a safe distance, but close enough to see the shake of his shoulders as he hauled them. He reached the train, looked about, and without shame, without a quiver, he fed the zippered mouth of the first bag into the grate. It resisted, then slid like a weight into ribs. The second bag went in the same way. He pressed his shoulder against the grate as if to push the bags through. One slipped, snagged, and there was a soft wet sound under the clank of metal. He straightened, stood for a beat, and then walked back to his house humming the same tuneless note. He locked his door and, for a second, I could have sworn he wiped his hands on his jacket like he'd done a chore. We did not speak. We turned and ran the 3 blocks home with shoes slapping on pavement, the image of his hands wrapped around the plastic repeating in my head like a slapped film loop. I locked the door, woke Jenna's parents, and then, because panic finds certainty in procedure, I called the non-emergency number. They came out in 2 police cruisers. Officer Patel was a young woman whose ponytail hopped as she ran. She listened to our breathless story with a face that moved from professional disbelief into something colder, practical. She took notes. She asked for descriptions. She asked if we could show her where the train was. We led them in our slippers. At the corner the storm grate sagged, and the night air smelled suddenly sour, like old fruit. Patel frowned, radio in her hand, and then she crouched and pried at the grate with a gloved hand. It wouldn't budge at first. She worked until she had a lever and, with a brute tug, the rusted metal gave. A face as ordinary as a mailbox tube opened beneath. We all smelled it then iron, the wetness of cloth left in rain. Patel radioed it in and I felt the world tilt. They called for backup. Neighbors drifted to porches blinking into the night. Someone switched a light on, then another. Caldwell's porch light clicked and shone like an accusation. They hauled the first bag out. It was heavy in a way that makes your knees go soft. The zipper was wet. Inside were shoes, small shoes, and a folded jacket with a cartoon fox. They unwrapped photographs and the same image, the one with the boy at the sprinkler, slid from the stack and landed on the pavement between our shoes. At the edge of the photo, a smear of something dark. Paramedics arrived. Officers worked like clockwork. Caldwell watched from his doorway, face blank as linen. When someone put a hand on his shoulder and read him his rights, he didn't look surprised. He said nothing. They found more, a shoebox with folded scarves, a woman's scarf, 2 sets of keys, and underneath, as if tucked by habit into the bottom of a laundry basket, a manila folder with clippings, missing persons posters, printouts of social media profiles of families in neighboring towns. My stomach flipped into a hard stone. The officers unspooled more of his life, community board minutes, a volunteer card for the library, receipts from out of state. The neatness I'd seen earlier revealed itself as a catalog. By dawn they were hauling bags into the squad cars. They called in detectives, the coroner, and then, because horror requires names to become real, the missing persons unit. The media arrived and beat up fans an hour later. Lights popped like sudden suns under the maple trees. Our street was a nervous line of neighbors holding mugs and phones, faces lit and pale. Caldwell was taken without struggle. In his kitchen, detectives found a camera set up in the attic pointing toward the sleeping rooms of adjacent houses, its clock set to 3 a.m., like someone proud of his schedule. He had taken photographs, yes, but not of vacations and bookshelves, of faces asleep and of keys on nightstands, of private door slams cataloged as if resources. That afternoon, in a room that smelled like sanitizer and coffee, Detective Morales showed us a thin file. Inside were faces I recognized from posters in laundromats and grocery store notice boards. A girl who disappeared on a 4th of July parade, a man who didn't return from a shift at a diner, a mother who never showed up for her son's school play. They matched the scanned images found in Caldwell's folder. They told us he'd been arrested on multiple counts: kidnapping, evidence tampering, unlawful surveillance. They said alleged and suspect and pending, formal words rounding the edges of the truth. When I sat in my kitchen later and watched the sun tilt and the late morning life resume, mowers revving, kids' bikes scraping gravel, I felt like a foreigner in my own safe little geography. People asked if I was okay. I said yes, because noise requires answers and because there are no words for the shape of horror that settles into your joints. For weeks afterward I checked the locks, twice, 3 times, lingered in doorways, and refused every neighborhood barbecue offer. The trash bags on the curb at 3 in the morning stopped. The metronome stopped. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and my daughter sleeps too loudly and the clock heels toward 3, I hear the scrape of rubber on asphalt in my memory and the wet sound under the grate. I think of the neat stack of photographs and the way Mr. Caldwell's hands had moved as if tucking the world into boxes. They told us they recovered remains, that some families would get answers, that indictments would be filed. That was the end of the neighbor who had been nice at barbecues and precise in his gardening. That was also the part that felt like a relief. The ending was clean in official language. The definitive thing I carried away was small and stubborn. A single photograph the officers let me keep, a grainy snapshot of the sprinkler boy, cheeks like dough. I keep it in a drawer, face up, and sometimes at night I sit with it and say his name aloud, as if speaking names aloud stitches people back to the world. It's all I have to prove that curiosity did not invent the dragging sound. Someone had, and now he would not do it again. I had been thinking about dinner, what to defrost, whether to stop for milk, when the rear of the sedan in front of me shuddered into my bumper. It was one of those soft, stupid collisions that feels louder in your head than outside. A dull thunk, a metallic rattle, the radio is cutting into the sudden vacancy where the highway noise had been. I pulled over onto the shoulder, hazard lights strobing. My hands were slick with sweat even though the night air was cold. My heart thudded the guilty rhythm of a man who'd just been careless. The other car coasted 3 feet further and stopped. A tall man in a denim jacket climbed out, hair wet from the drizzle, his face open and normal as if he were stepping into a grocery store. He clicked his hood closed with a bored hand and walked back to my window. "Sorry," I said, reflex. "I wasn't watching." He held up a hand. "It's fine. Just bump." "We'll exchange." He trailed off and glanced toward his car as if remembering something he'd left on the stove. Then I heard it, a muffled banging from his trunk. At first I blamed the spare tire, a loose jack, a box sliding. The sound was a dull, percussive thump, 3 quick beats, then a pause, then a longer, frantic series, like someone drumming from the inside of a drum. The hairs along my forearms prickled. Rain ticked on the roof of my car and the night smelled of wet tar and coal brakes. He stiffened. "That's just," he began, and then cut the sentence off, as if the right words had been swallowed. He walked to the back of his car and popped the trunk. The lid opened on a dark mouth. Rain light washed the chrome of the latch. For a second nothing visible moved, and I thought the banging had been my imagination until the sound came again, louder, closer, accompanied by a muffled voice. "Help, please." It was garbled, raw. It was a child's voice. My vision narrowed to the zipper of an inside coat, the white knuckles at the edge of canvas. The man leaned in, his face unreadable. He turned back at me with the smooth, practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed apology lines. "Old radio," he said. "My cousin, he hides the speakers when they get knocked around. Sorry about the noise. Just a storage thing." My mouth closed around a rationalization. People stashed things in trunks. People transported noisy equipment. But the voice, so small, so frightened, gnawed at the inside of my skull. I remembered a news piece about kids abducted and locked in cars, how the most dangerous crimes are the ones that look ordinary until they don't. Should we call?" I started. He snapped his head up so fast I missed the movement the first time. "No," he said too quickly. "No cops." His palms were flat on the rim of the trunk like a man holding himself together. "You don't need to make a big thing. We're fine." "Fine?" The sound I made came out half laugh, half sob. "There's someone in there." He smiled, all teeth and charm. "Panicked, that's all. I'll get them out, no need for drama." He reached into the trunk and his hand trembled. For a moment I thought he would actually pull a child out like an apology. Instead he closed his fingers around the zipper and tugged it slightly to one side, then let it go as if to test the resistance. The banging increased, frantic now, the voice sharper. "Please. Please." My chest tightened. I had a choice that felt tiny and enormous: believe a stranger, shut the trunk, exchange insurance cards, go home with an unsettled conscience, or do something. The rationalist marched. Maybe it was an animal, maybe a prank, maybe a neighbor's knock, but with each maybe the sound inside the trunk translated into a face I couldn't stop seeing. I pushed the door open. He looked at me like a man caught. For the first time there was something like anger in his eyes. No, the word was a crisp order. I held his gaze in the car between us, a rectangle of metal and a trunk lid like a mouth. "You open it. Now." He laughed, a ragged thing. "You want me to," he began, then shifted. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine." He stepped back and bent as if to bend the lock. My phone was in my hand. No bars, the highway had chewed the signal down to static. I hit 911 and listened to the flat recorded voice. I told the dispatcher where I was, and the operator said, "Stay where you are. Help is on the way." Her voice was thin, polite. The man made a motion, an almost suave flick, and yanked the zipper harder. Something scraped. A small, wet sound. The emergency release strap inside the trunk under the lid, I'd seen them on the news, flashed a second and then slid into sight. For a beat neither of us moved. It was a graceless, human beat, a breath collected, a centipede of decision crawling up my spine. He lunged. His hand closed on my wrist with a visor-bearing, possessive force. Pain shot up my arm. He was faster than he looked. He wanted what? To shove the trunk closed? To silence me? To keep his secret from the world? His face was smooth and then suddenly like stone. "Stop," I said, and the word felt tiny. My elbow jerked free. I staggered back, hit the bumper, and reached for the release. My fingers found plastic and metal, and with a yank the trunk popped open more. The noise inside was a terrible, forced relief, a head bowed, a wet cough, the rattle of a zip tie. A small pair of eyes looked up at me from inside darkness, wide, red-rimmed, terrified. A girl, maybe 12, hair matted, cheeks streaked with dirt and dried rain. Her wrists had pale loops around them where something had been cut rope, maybe. Her breath came in sharp, shallow pulls. "Call 911, she rasped. "Please, He pressed close and the world snapped cold and small. "She's fine," he lied, smiling. "She's just confused." Then he hit me. The blow was a dull, concerted thing and I stumbled. The radio inside my car flared and then died. Instinct, some animal, blinker thing, surged. I grabbed the edge of the trunk and hauled the girl out like a package, adrenaline burning cold as ice in my limbs. Her head hit my shoulder. She tasted of metal and salt. He grabbed at her coat. "Give her back." His voice is an ugly thing when it loses its manners. He lunged. I swung a hand and my fist met his jaw with a wet, right-angled sound. He staggered. I don't remember thinking about the ethics of hitting another adult. There was only the practical, clumsy geometry of keeping him away. We grappled. I felt the slick of his sleeve as he tried to wrench free. The girl's boots were small against my shins. She used them to push me and hopped out like one of the animals that live by surviving. Behind, the highway blinked with headlights and, improbably, a delivery truck eased to the shoulder a few dozen yards away. A man climbed out waving. Someone else had heard or seen the flurry in the wet light. The driver cursed and then, for the first time since I'd seen him, he showed a flicker of calculation. He backed up toward his car as if deciding whether to run. I shoved the girl toward the truck driver and shouted for help. The man who'd been driving the delivery van straddled his own vehicle and started toward us. The neighbor on duty across the shoulder brandished a flashlight. Its beam caught the other man's eyes and made them glitter. Facing witnesses, the denim jacket man stepped back, hands raised, the performance of a repentant neighbor returning to center stage. He muttered defensively. I was helping, his voice fell into nonsense. Police arrived with the dull efficiency of the late-night shift, bright uniforms, clipped questions, bright flashes of blue and red. I told them everything in staccato pieces. The girl, Maya, she told them between shivering sobs, had been taken from a bus stop 2 towns over. She kept saying her mother's name as if saying it aloud would stitch her back into real life. Officers wrapped her in a thermal blanket, ice soft but hard with that professional sorrow. They handcuffed him without resistance. In the front seat of his car they found a coil of cord, duct tape, a small pile of cash, and a disposable phone with recent searches about quiet routes and how to hide a purse and trunk. The grin he'd worn at the roadside was gone. The face beneath it was small and ordinary and suddenly explainable and therefore monstrous. The dispatcher read him his rights. He spit out a string of excuses that crumbled against the weight of evidence. I sat on the curb as the dawn began to thin the rain to mist. My wrists were numb, my shirt smelled of diesel and something copper strong. The girl sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping water like it was a miraculous ocean. An officer took my statement and then another, repeating and transcribing, the bureaucracy like a bandage. Weeks later I watched footage on the local news, grainy cameras from the intersection, my car and his. The trunk popped open, the moment stretched and flattened into a 20-second clip. Detectives later told me he had crossed counties, tried similar abductions, and that the arrest would close several active cases. The girl went home to her mother within a day. I kept a card the detective slid across the table. "You saved a life," it read in blocky type. At night I still flinch at the thought of a trunk closing. I replay the banging in my head and wince at how near complicit I had been in every rational explanation I offered myself. But the finality of it is exact. I hit my brakes. I got out. I heard a sound. I opened the lid. The end is clean and terrible. A child was trapped in darkness and now she is not. The man in the denim jacket sits in a cell where the lights are intrusive and the doors do not yield. When I drive now, I keep my distance and the radio on. I lock my doors. I look for the small things, the way someone's hand rests on a trunk, a tightened jaw, an unnatural smile, and I do not let myself paper over the noise. The kid's voice in the trunk is lodged under my ribs like a foul. If I hear it again, I will not pretend. I should have kept driving. I should have found another lit sign, a newer motel, a truck stop with a diner that served food at midnight. Instead, I followed the tired neon that promised a bed, vacancy pulsing like a heartbeat at the edge of the highway. The rain had stopped in a soft, oily hush. My windshield smelled of road and coolant. It was late. I was too tired for paranoia. The desk clerk was a man in his 60s with a cardigan that had seen better winters. He moved like someone who learned to be patient the hard way, slow hands, slow smile. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and lemon oil. He slid a key across the counter with a plastic tag stamped 12. The bell on the counter tittered when I set my bag down. Wi-Fi? I asked, stupidly. Network spotty, he said. Room's quiet. Heater works. His eyes lingered on my face for half a beat longer than necessary, like he was inventorying me. Night's been calm. He said it the way people say weather, an old script. The room looked like a photograph of what a motel room should be. Thin floral bedspread, a lamp that needed a new shade, a TV the size of a pizza box. The radiator hissed like a small animal. The wallpaper had a faint pattern that tried to be cheerful. Close up it looked like a forest of small, tired trees. There was a rectangular window above the headboard, its curtains drawn tight with a dead weight. I set my things down and, for the first time in too many hours, let myself breathe. I showered like a man rinsing off a long day of decisions. Hot water scrubbed grit from my skin, the room fogged. When I stepped out, the world were sharper, cold air, a towel that smelled vaguely of bleach. I made coffee in the little pot on the counter and watched the TV until my eyes stung. The static on Channel 3 looked like snow in an old movie. Around midnight I turned off the lamp and lay down, the mattress complaining, the smell of detergent trying to be reassuring. Then I heard it. A soft metallic rattle at the door. Not loud, at first it could have been the wind prying at the frame, a truck settling on the highway, a shutter kicked by a careless guest. I lay still listening. The sound paused. My heart ratcheted into a new gear anyway. Wind, I told myself. Chain on, deadbolt engaged, keys in my pocket. Rational things for irrational nights. It came again, this time with a little more insistence, the knob a slow, precise jiggle followed by a pause, then the handle tapping as if someone tested it with repeated, careful fingers. The chain by the inside latch rattled faintly toward the edge. It sounded like someone learning the door by feel. I sat up, muscles in my shoulders tight. I had read about something like this, people who slipped in during a blackout, opportunists looking for wallets and phones, or worse. I told myself the motel would have security, that someone outside could be a lost soul, a resident returning too drunk. I said all those things because saying them felt like armor. I got out of bed and toggled the chain, feeling the cheap metal bite at my palm. "Hello?" I said through the door, too loudly. The sound felt naked in the room. The rattling paused. A flat, male voice answered, muffled by the door. "Ma'am? I'm sorry. Wrong room. Sorry." It was low, practiced, apologetic in a way that demanded forgiveness. Relief slid through me so fast it left a guilty slick. A man, not an animal. A mistake, not design. I should have stayed in bed. Instead I asked, stupidly, "You okay?" No answer at first. Then the handle turned again, this time with a new technique, light, fingernail quickness, like someone moving a lock without a key. The chain trembled, the door softened to his push. The voice returned, closer to the crack at the bottom of the door. "Please, I'm just..." I grabbed the phone I tucked under the pillow. No bars. The hallway outside the room, I could see through the slit of the door, was a pool of dim light and damp carpet patterned with avocado circles. The emergency light at the end of the hall winked, then steadied. I pressed the deadbolt harder, feeling the mechanism groan. The rattling became a tapping, rhythmic, as if someone outside had found a cadence to work with. Behind the door, I heard a new sound, low breathing, then a small metallic scrape that could have been a key being fumbled. My palms went slick. I tried to pull myself toward reason. Maybe a guest next door had let their kid play with keys. Maybe the clerk had misplaced a master. Maybe it was the rain shifting a stray board. Rationality felt thinner and thinner against the sound. I slid the chain into place more firmly and crouched, balancing myself on a drawer. The handle rattled again, harder this time, then softer. Then a new sound threaded through the metal knocks, a high, weight dragging as if something heavy scraped the linoleum outside. It timed itself to the handle, a punctuation, a stamp. I called the desk. The line on the motel phone crackled. Someone picked up on the third ring. "Front desk?" I said. My voice was flat with forced calm. "There's someone at my door." "Just a minute," the man said. Then a weary laugh, as if someone else's emergencies were a Tuesday script. "We had a lot of walks tonight." His voice thinned. "Room service?" "No," I whispered. The handle clattered again and then menacingly slid under the bolt. "Please, come please." Okay. He sighed. "I'll be up." The call ended with a soft click that felt like a promise. Time stretched. I listened to the movements outside, the careful footfall, the man's voice muttered into the keyhole. He spoke nonsense, a half-song, like someone verbalizing a map of my door. Once, he said my name. No, he said the username I'd used when booking, the email handle I used for small transactions. The air left my lungs. My mind began to compile small, impossible details and make monsters out of them. The clerk's eyes, the way he'd looked at me, the fact there had been one occupant on the log that night, the way the maintenance closet was unlocked when I'd passed it. I tried to tell myself I was overwrought. I tried to dress my fear in plausible excuses. Each explanation was a thin paper over a widening gap. A key turned in the deadbolt. A precise click. My stomach dropped. The chain gave under him. He pushed. The door bowed inward about an inch. I lunged and shoved my shoulder against it, a stupid theater of resistance, while my mind emptied to one command: survive. The chain snapped with a small, horrible sound like something being unmade. My shoulder slammed against wood, the breath forced out of me. The opening widened. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, something heavy and honest, and raised it. "Get out!" I screamed. The door opened a fraction more. A shape filled it, a man with a shadowed face, rain beaded on his jacket, eyes leveled in a way that made my skin prickle. He smiled, but the smile was the wrong shape for his face. He seemed, absurdly, as if he had rehearsed this entrance before and found the moment long awaited. He slid in, quiet as a thought. The room smelled of wet wool and old money. He moved like a man who knew exactly how much space to take. For a second I measured his things, his shoes, his keys, and tried to find the ordinary. There was none. I swung the lamp with a force that surprised me. It struck him in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall. He laughed once, a small, clinical sound. Then he lunged across the bed with a calmness that made my mouth taste metal. We grappled. His hands were like cold leather on my wrist. He said, in the same low voice I'd heard before, "You shouldn't scream." Something in me unclenched. A trained animal part that knows how to make people notice reached the surface. I screamed again, louder, and this time the hallway answer was different. Shoes hit carpet. Lights flared. A door down the hall banged open as the clerk, older cardigan, Ty Askew, rushed toward us with a flashlight. He shouted something I couldn't make out, and in the sudden exposure the man who'd been trying to be a shadow let go. They wrestled him out into the corridor. The clerk's face was white as a dish towel. I called, he kept saying to me, to himself. Sirens wailed. The man didn't fight the officers. Perhaps he knew there was a small script for every corner of the night. They led him to a patrol car. They cuffed him with an economy of motions that stripped his performance to ordinary metal. The officers found a pocket-knife file of lockpicks and a small bundle of motel reservation slips, photocopied driver's licenses, and a phone with dozens of notes about room numbers. Later, under the washed-out light of the lobby, they read him Miranda. He said nothing that fit any story. The detective told me afterward he had 3 prior misdemeanors for trespassing and a string of complaints across several counties, man identified as the doorman on motel kitchens and police blotters. He'd followed a pattern, late sign-in, a man who looked like a neighbor. He told the detective that the man had key skills and a cruelty for which there was no proper adjective. The aftermath smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. I learned that the clerk had not been idle. He'd been on the phone between rooms, his voice low and frantic. He'd had a key cut once for an emergency. The man had taken advantage. The motel upgraded locks the next day. The detective handed me a paper to sign. I trembled while my name inked itself into bureaucracy that felt like glue. I didn't sleep for 2 days. When I finally fell into an exhausted, jumpy sleep in my own apartment, I dreamed the motel's neon blinked under my eyelids and the latch rattled in the dark. The man went to jail, the locks were changed, the clerk cried in the back office when he realized his error. Those are facts, and they are the ending. A man who rattled doors and found excuses was finally set behind bars. But endings do not always repair what fear takes. Sometimes you wake in the dark and your hands curl involuntarily around your bedside lamp as if you might have to swing it again. I keep my phone by my hand now, and I always check the chain before I sleep. When a door handle clicks in the night, I do not let myself play the small games of rationalization. I move. I call. I do not stay. The lock and the law did their work. I did mine. The final, definitive thing is simple. I breathed, I acted, and the night lost its appetite that night. I had been doing deliveries long enough to trust the rhythm of the night, the app's soft buzz, the route popping up, the brief arithmetic of timing and tips. The car smelled of pizza grease and the cheap air freshener I'd hung from the mirror. New car, the tag promised, and my hands still had the warmth of the last order. It was a Tuesday, slow but steady. The road outside town hummed under the streetlights like a low engine. The order came in with an odd instruction line that made me frown. Leave inside. Client waiting. The address was on Maple Hollow, the little subdivision with the mailboxes that leaned like old men. The map pin dropped at a house we delivered to before, a neat bungalow with a porch swing and geraniums in summer. I hit accept and thought nothing of it. Leave inside meant the customer trusted you or the porch was safe. People put out tags sometimes. When I pulled up, the place was wrong in a way that registered first as a silence. No porch light, something I'd noticed before in 2 or 3 other houses and chalked up to economy or a burned out bulb. No curtain movement, no faint TV glow behind the shallow blinds. The mailbox sagged, its flag stiffer than I remembered. There were 3 newspapers folded on the stoop, still dry from last weekend, pages fanned like a small, complacent animal. The grass in the yard had the careful, untrimmed look of someone who either had just moved in or just stopped caring. My phone showed the ETA was immediate. The app's map pin had inside stamped in its little status bubble. I stood on the drive and checked the lock icon on my order screen, the delivery confirmation options waiting. My phone had 1 bar, enough for a call, probably. I should have called the number on the app. I dialed and heard a ringtone go through twice. Voicemail picked up. Hey, it's Maple Hollow Pizza. Your driver is outside. I left it short, efficient. No answer. The building felt like a photograph that had been left out in the rain, the porch lightless, the paint peeling on one corner like a paper strip. There were rational explanations I told myself while I crossed the lawn. Maybe the customer went out and forgot to cancel inside. Maybe guests were asleep. Maybe it was a mistake. I slid the pizza bag off my shoulder, the box still warm, perfumed with garlic and tomato. The air around the house smelled faintly of mildew and old upholstery and abandoned smell, but not completely empty. The front door had a mail slot. Through the thin gap I could see a dark entry foyer, an outline of a staircase. No light. No welcome mat, oddly. I rapped on the door 3 times with the knuckle of my left hand. The sound was too small in the hush. After the 3rd knock, from inside the house, I heard the faint rustling of fabric like curtains moving, and then something else, a scrape at the base of the interior door. I supposed it was pets or settling pipes, and I told myself to be patient. Then a voice, muffled and oddly intimate, answered from behind the wood as if it were right next to the lock. "Thanks, please leave it at the counter." The words were exactly the phrasing the app had shown me. Calm, domestic. Please came again with a small, precise ache. It should have been ordinary, a human voice in a human house. But the tone made the hair along my arms prick. It was too clipped, as if read from a script. And there was an echo I couldn't place, a second whisper layered under the first, out of time, like something beyond the plaster. I slipped the pizza through the mail slot, catching the edge of the box as it thunked onto the hallway carpet inside. The sound was small and domestic, somebody would fetch it in a moment. I leaned my palm flat against the door, felt the warmth of the wood. Behind me, the street was empty and enormous, a watercolor pool of sodium light. I waited. Something moved in the doorway. Not a person, but the impression of motion, a shadow like a hand waving on the inside of the curtain. The voice said, "Thank you," and then, as if thinking of an afterthought, "Please come in." Doors unlocked. My rational brain toggled through sensible responses. Never enter a stranger's home, take a photo of the receipt, wait in sight. But curiosity is a small, sticky animal, and I had been up since dawn, driving on autopilot. I thought about the tip, sometimes a little conversation got you a better rating. I should have left the pizza on the mat and walked away. Instead I rapped the door again and called, "Hey, I left it inside. Are you okay?" There was a delay, then a soft sound like someone settling their weight. The deadbolt slid with a sound I can still hear when I'm too awake at night, a metal sigh. The door clicked inward an inch. The voice closer now, a whisper right behind the wood, said, "Come in." "It's just me." I told myself to be professional. I told myself deliveries sometimes required a step inside to slide the order on the counter, to hand over a receipt. The do not enter rules we've been taught should have been bright neon in my mind, but these principles can be dimmed by exhaustion and the soft human need for approval. I turned the knob. The house smelled like laundry left too long in the washer, sweet, sour, faintly fermented. The foyer was dim, dust motes spinning in the slant of streetlight through a window. The hall led past framed photographs hung in a row, smiling people at a beach, a small child with a crooked tooth, faces that were perfectly ordinary but unsettling because they were not the faces I'd seen on the app. The living room light was on, a TV screen glowed with a frozen soap opera. A couch faced it like a throne, there were empty coffee cups, a pair of reading glasses, a single shoe under the table. That shoe, mud-streaked, scuffed, looked recent. "Follow me," the voice said from somewhere deeper inside. "Just put it by the kitchen counter. I'll tip you extra." The kitchen door was ajar. Beyond it, the refrigerator hummed, its magna-cluttered door pale in the light. On the counter, directly beneath a bulkhead, an array of plates lay stacked neatly. On the nearest plate, a napkin was folded into a precise rectangle, and on top of the napkin lay a small slip of paper with my order number written in shaky pen. Someone had set up the room to accept the delivery. I set the box down and my fingers left an oily ring on the laminate. The house's domesticity made my stomach swim. Someone had been expecting this exact order. I took a step back and saw, in the corner of my eye, a hollow where drywall met baseboard and access panel held with a couple of rusted screws, its edge scraped like a fingernail had carved at it. From the panel, a faint staccato scratching answered my heartbeat. At first I convinced myself it was rodents, mice under the floor, the house settling. Then a whisper, close enough to brush my ear, said, "Thank you." Not the same voice as before, softer, higher, almost a child's inhale. My legs unclenched. The rational list reassembled like a shaky ladder. I had the receipt, the GPS pin matched, the app timestamp showed the order had come from this account. Someone inside the house had made the request. But who? How long had they been here? The curtains I'd seen earlier were caked with dust. The mail was piled like an accusation. The photographs on the wall, were they props or evidence? I moved toward the panel because fear is a perverse magnet for answers. My fingertips found the bolts, and before I could decide I was prying it open. The smell that rose from the gap was liver raw and old human and something worse. Inside, squeezed into a space the size of a footlocker, a pair of eyes blinked up at me like two small moons. A woman, or what had been a woman, peered through the darkness. Her face was paper thin, her hair was tucked against her skull, her lips were cracked. She smiled like a child who'd been told a secret. Her arms were folded around something wrapped in cloth. "You brought it," she said. There was gratitude in the single syllable and something like triumph. She pulled back and exposed a second figure behind her, another face hollow and older, a man with a beard like pubescent moss. Layers of lives seemed folded into that cramped space, people living in the seams of the house like mold. Before I could react, the woman reached out with an eager, skeletal hand. Her fingers brushed my wrist with the nicotine scent of someone who had nicked a match to warm food for a long time. The action should have been terrifying, instead it was almost polite. She said, "We order sometimes. We always pay. We don't like to come out." I backed away until the countertop stopped me, heart hammering so hard it blurred the photographs on the hallway wall. The rational explanations tumbled into each other: squatters, vagrants, people living in attics and crawl spaces to avoid notice. But these people had been here long enough to learn the app, to time deliveries to late night lull, to create an instruction precisely worded, "Leave inside." They'd made the house their world's edge. My skin crawled with the intimacy of that arrangement. "Police," I said, the word an act of solidity. "I'm calling them now." The woman's smile failed. The second face looked on as if from the bottom of a well. "We don't like cops," she said softly. "They take photographs. They take things." I had the number in my head through muscle memory. I fumbled my phone, palms slick, and called the non-emergency line because my signal was poor and I wanted to be sure. It took 3 rings before someone answered. The officer on the line told me to stay outside if I could, to move to the sidewalk and wait. I told him I was inside. He snapped, asked where I was, and I realized the dangerous smallness of the house closing in. When I stepped out into the porch with the app still open on my screen, the woman's voice followed me, soft and almost maternal. "We ordered to be sure. We don't mean harm." We waited. The police arrived in a pair of cars with lights like low constellations. They moved with shoes that sounded like a dozen rehearsed lies. I told them everything about the mail, the curtains, the pictures. They took my details, then pried the panel open with a crowbar as if it were a stage prop. The cramped dark yielded to the flashlight's eye. What they found inside filled the back of the cruiser's log for 3 pages. 2 adults and a teenage boy, living in the wall cavities behind the kitchen and the attic eaves, a network of tunnels cut under the house and between studs, bedding made from thrift store blankets, a cache of receipts and empty food boxes, and, worst of all, mail from a dozen different addresses, some years old. They'd been ordering food, sometimes paying in cash, sometimes noting the app's comments to minimize contact. The police spoke to them gently and then with the practical bluntness of people who have to turn private horror into records. The woman, whose name the officers eventually pulled from a chipped driver's license hidden in a tinfoil packet, cried when they unfolded a blanket. She told them a story of eviction and bad luck, of an ex who'd left and a landlord who'd been slow to answer, and of nights when streets were worse than walls. The boy said little and watched me as if I were a novelty he had found in a book. There was no malice in the faces they made, there was survival, which felt like a type of quiet cruelty. They were taken to a social services van that would take them to a shelter, the officers explained. The house, the police said, was technically abandoned, tax notices stacked in the living room like sorry letters, and someone had been living there in the hidden seams for months. The officers took my statement. Safety procedures unfolded in an efficient choreography. They logged the location, took photographs, recorded the delivery app's data that showed multiple orders, timestamps, and a small pattern. When the last car's taillight shrank into the night, the house felt bigger than it had before, its corners open like a mouth. I went back to the porch, picked up the cold pizza box and slid it into the recycle bin. The woman's voice, thin with a mixture of thanks and accusation, followed me on the air as I locked the van and drove away. In the days that followed, I thought of that voice often. The image of the cramped eyes in the wall was lodged under my ribs like a pebble. I had done what the job had taught me. I delivered, I verified, I called help. The finality of it sat in the paperwork I signed at the precinct and in the message the app sent that the order was completed. The horror, I learned, was not in monsters with teeth and claws but in the seams of a world where people could fold themselves into the empty places and become invisible. The end was not theatrical. It was social workers sorting blankets, an empty house slated for inspection, and a police report noting trespass and possible charges. The woman would get a bed in a shelter that night. The boy would get a cup of hot soup. I kept thinking, perversely, of the instruction the customer had left: leave inside. It had been literal and terrible. And I knew, with the uncomfortable clarity of someone who'd seen the underworkings of a house, that inside could mean so many secrets. My final certainty was practical and small. I stopped leaving orders in the mail slot. I photographed every delivery. I called before I crossed thresholds. I learned that doors can be open in more ways than one, and that sometimes what waits behind them is not what we imagine. I pressed the elevator button without thinking. 3 floors, late, the office building quiet as a throat after a cough. The lobby smelled faintly of copier toner and lemon cleaner. A vending machine hummed somewhere beyond the glass doors. I rode up in a metal box with my briefcase on my knees, thinking about coffee and the sleep that would make my thoughts less sharp. He got on at the 2nd floor, a man in a wool coat, damp hair from a drizzle, the kind of man you might not remember 5 minutes later. He nodded when we made that little commuter note to one another: long day, sorry we're late, and stood with his back to the mirrored wall, hands shoved in pockets. He hummed under his breath, a rhythm like someone practicing patience. At first we were the evening's ordinary geometry, 2 strangers sharing 3 square meters. The elevator hummed, lights buzzing above, the tile smell settling into the small space. We counted the floors in the clack of metal, customary small talk sliding off both of us. He answered in monosyllables. I told myself he was tired, or nervous, or polite. I told myself everything I could because the world prefers to be sensible. Then, on the 7th floor, between a flicker of light and the soft click of the indicator, the elevator stopped. A shudder more felt than heard. The cab shivered like a small animal settling. The display went blank. The floor numbers froze at a green 7 that had the wrong mathematics of a dead thing. We waited. My watch said 6 minutes. The man's foot tapped a slow, deliberate tempo against the floor. He laughed once, soft, dismissive. Always at the worst time, he said. I hit the alarm. The button made a small mechanical ding and then nothing. I jabbed the phone for signal, nothing but one blinking bar, and the emergency line showed a red cross on the screen as if the building itself had been punished. The air grew warm and stale and too close. We tried to call security and the line rang out into an elevator-shaped nothing. Hours are small things when you're awake and waiting. They become long things when you're trapped. We watched the angle of the light change through the slit where the doors met and then did not. We spoke at first to while away the clock, where we worked, the weather, the small banalities people offer when they don't want to say anything true. He answered, but his sentences shortened. The tapping of his foot slowed to irregular beats, and the hum under his breath acquired bitterness. When 3 hours had taken the shape of a long, slow evening, the normality crumbled on the seam of a laugh that wasn't laughter. You know, he said without preface, I always carry things. You should too. There was no humor there, just a soft, precise statement. He reached into his coat pocket with a calm that made me aware of every hair on my arms. The movement was small and the world narrowed to the line of his hand. He turned his palm to me and opened it. A folding knife lay there, blade half exposed, catching the light with an indifferent coldness. I wanted immediately to manufacture every reasonable explanation: utility knife, fruit cutter, a tool for work. The mouth finds supply lines like a good officer in a riot. I told myself it was a tool for his trade. He saw the race of my thoughts and smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. People judge me, he said. They see a coat and they think a man. I learned a different way. If the door stuck, you need to be prepared. There was the faintest pocket of laughter in his voice, otherwise the room filled with the clatter of the building's breath. Rational thought is a kind of social armor. You name it and you put it on. I named knife is for cutting rope, carpentry, opening boxes. It did little to stop the pressure in my throat. As hours grew teeth, he grew faster, less polite. He flicked the blade open and closed it with a sound like a small, dry clock. You ever think about how easy it is? He asked. He balanced the knife on his thumb like a man considering a lighter. The blade glinted. A small thing. A wrong person. A door that won't open. I tried to laugh. My voice was thin. You're not serious. Sometimes I think about the right time, he said. Not for me, other people. You don't know people. I know how little effort it takes. The knife's edge traced a tiny arc in the air and the reflection made a line across the mirrored wall, duplicating his hand until two blades hovered. A rational explanation was gone. Tread was a more generous narrator. It supplied motive, history, reasons I could not know. I tried to talk him down about families, about consequences, about the stupidity of making a complicated life worse, but he shook his head the way a man brushes crumbs off his sleeve. You talk like somebody with a life, he said. I used to. There's a difference between having a life and protecting it. Time carved itself into us as the ventilation sighed. We tried the emergency hatch in the ceiling. It lodged. We pried at the seams between the doors. We shouted until our voices were small and hoarse. He watched me with a closeness that felt like a prescription. Stare until you know where the small spider moves. Mostly I tried to keep him talking, because speech is a thread people follow out of dark places. He told me, in fragmentary stories, about a job that chewed him, about small humiliations that formed a map in his chest, about a last bank notice that had been too much. Hours slicked into confessions. The knife would make a soft punctuation at the end of some sentences. He made jokes about turning a clock back. He made fewer jokes as the night thickened. When he stood and pushed his back to the mirrored wall, breath fogging the glass, I saw the knife move from his hand to the back of his waistband. The casualness of the motion was an announcement. "Do you have kids?" he asked suddenly, like a probing. The question landed more like a test than a conversation starter. "No," I said. "Not yet." "Good." He smiled then, briefly, not cruel, but small and precise. "You should be careful." The elevator smelled like old pages and the oil that lubricates loosening machines. My heart was a reckless animal. I thought of pressing every button, smashing a panel, trying to catch a moment of slowness. He noticed the twitch in my fingers and moved faster, circling, the blade whispering. He said, in a voice that sounded practiced, "If you don't move, this can be clean." Nonsense precautions flew into my mind. Protocol: tell him my name, tell him a story, make him a person with a past that includes mercy. I did all of them, and they ate up a thin hour like bread. He got tired of stories. He wanted truth and effects. A mistake was my salvation. He leaned too far to the left to read a phone signal that suddenly spiked on my screen. Some emergency pinged through the shaft, and in that tiny motion his hand loosened. For a sliver of time his attention flicked to the phone, to the possibility of being found. I moved. Everything slowed as if the building wanted an audience. I lunged with the momentum of someone who had exhausted argument and had no eloquence left. I grabbed his wrist. The blade flashed. Pain scored my palm, but it was ignorance compared to fear. He lunged too, but momentum is democratic. He'd shifted to control, and in shifting gave me torque. We grappled, metal kissed bone. The knife clattered to the floor and slid under the panel where the lining met the door sill. We clawed. Metal screeched on metal. I remember my breath like a kettle on a low flame, a sound I wanted to stifle. With a desperate shove I pinned his shoulders against the mirrored wall, my free hand angling to find the blade's path. The blade cut my thumb when he jerked. Blood warmed the air in a smell that made everything very, terribly close. Somewhere, like a deus ex machina of municipal patience, there was a click. A sound not unlike relief, power returning, the elevator's hungry motor testing its teeth. The display flickered. The light steadied like someone reinserting a plug. The doors, obedient to circuitry and contempt, sighed open. We were a tangle of limbs and breath. I kept him pinned until security personnel flooded the shaft. Lights, voices, gloves, and a small, efficient clatter as someone read him his rights. He looked at me as if surprised to see another person still breathing. The knife lay on the threshold like a small, shameful thing. They took him away along with an ambulance for my aunt. His name, when the officer said it later, was a grid of other names, a record of petty crimes and a recent escalation. I learned he'd been on watch lists for volatile behavior. I learned the building's alarm had been glitching. I learned a dozen inconclusive things that used to be explanations for why the world was not all monsters. He would stand in a courtroom, and his anger and the knife and the hours would be parsed into charges. The ending was a bureaucratic kind of mercy. I survived. I left the elevator with a bandaged hand, a hospital wrist splint, and a card that said "You did everything right," a phrase that tastes like antiseptic. That night the building fixed the alarm. The company sent emails about safety protocols. I filed a statement. Sometimes, late, I relived the small animal mathematics of it. The second his hand loosened, the exact angle the blade took, the way the light died and came back. I still flinch at the click of a folding knife in a pocket. I rebuilt reasons and sensible narratives for days, because survival wants handwriting that wasn't panic. But the truth is simple and ugly and decisive. A stranger with a weapon decided to see if I would be collateral. I decided to move. Hours had stretched thin and mean, but they ended when I chose a moment and acted. The elevator doors opened. He went to a cell. I went to a hospital. I bear a pale scar across my thumb, a tidy, conclusive line, and the memory of a man's smile that never quite reached his eyes. I had been on the road since dawn, the sort of trip that turned the day into a series of small, forgettable motions: exit, merge, coffee, more miles. By late afternoon I wanted nothing more than to shave off a few minutes and follow the GPS's smug shortest route. It led me down a narrow feeder road I'd never noticed before, edged with chain-link fencing and signs that read "No trespassing and authorized vehicles only" in rusted lettering. Ordinarily I would have turned back. I told myself shortcuts were practical. I told myself I was in a hurry. I told myself a lot of things because that's how you quiet a creeping unease. At first the industrial district looked ordinary for an afternoon outside the city. Low warehouses, the occasional loading bay with a rubber curtain flapping, stacked pallets like small brown cities. Sodium lamps buzzed overhead, throwing halos of orange on cracked concrete. The air tasted of oil and hot metal. When a semi idled nearby, I felt a gust of diesel wash over my face and the tiny hairs on my arms prick with static. Somewhere a ventilation fan clicked and clacked with a mechanical patience that made the silence feel ordered. I slowed to check a sign, and a delivery truck rolled up behind me, then another car, then a van. Each of them stayed a respectful distance at first, the way people do on narrow roads. I blinked and kept going. Maybe they were headed to shift change. Maybe this was a crossroads for local traffic. Rational thoughts. Temporary comfort. But as I turned into a tighter alley between two corrugated buildings, the oscillation of headlights in my rearview mirror tightened into a pattern. 2 vehicles, then 3, then 4. They didn't pass. They matched my speed, mirroring me, maintaining a wedge of light like teeth closing. I checked my mirrors more often, the rear view a pool of moving white and red. At the next intersection I took a left, then a right, trying to shake whatever had latched on. The cluster of vehicles followed. From different directions, as if they had been waiting on every approach. A pickup emerged from the far side of a loading dock, a sedan slid out from behind a stacked container, a van eased away from a side entrance. Headlights appeared like comma marks in the near dark, then resolved into vehicles that fell in line behind me. At some point the lanes narrowed, the buildings leaned over the road like watchful neighbors. I began to feel observed the way you feel observed when a room goes quiet and someone is still cleaning their glass. The big rakes hummed, the vans idled, and every engine note seemed timed to my heartbeat. When I told myself these were drivers who had simply chosen the same route, my throat filled with a thin, dry taste of iron. My rational voice said this was improbable but possible. Another quieter voice tightened its grip and said, "Watch the mirrors." The first direct sign that this was not coincidence came when a vehicle closed the distance on my bumper and then eased in front of me. It wasn't fast or reckless, it was deliberate, as if someone had practiced the exact space to occupy. The driver of that car did not leave a gap or wave me by. They simply held the lane and waited. Another vehicle, a van, took up position to my left. A truck idled behind me and a pickup inched forward to block my retreat. My peripheral vision filled with the shapes of headlights multiplying, surrounding me in a geometric patience that irritated the rational brain with how impossible it was. Panic is often a slow burn until it isn't. I tried to laugh once, a brittle thing, and told myself to be reasonable. These were shift workers. The warehouse doors had timed departures. Anyone could be lost. Then the man in the van leaned out a window and swung a flashlight. He didn't flash it like warning, no, he swept it like a stagehand revealing actors in place. The beam caught my mirror and for a slice of second I saw faces not turned in surprise or concern but arranged, composed, like harbingers. No one shouted. No one gestured for me to move. They simply oriented themselves to me and held position. I tried to back up. Gravel chewed at the tires. The truck behind me matched my reverse and crowded closer. Every route I tried to take was answered by the quiet arrival of another vehicle, appearing from a gap in the stacked pallets or the shadow of a loading dock. I could not tell where they emerged from. I only knew, with a blunt and particular certainty, that they had filled every conceivable escape route with synchronized patience. My phone, dead earlier, blinked with a single bar and then went dark as if the industrial shadows ate the signal. The GPS icon spun, impotent. I felt the distance between option and trap collapse. The human mind scrambles. I considered confrontation and dismissed it because cars were the only barrier between me and whatever those men wanted. I thought about driving straight through the cluster, using the car like a contemptuous battering ram. I thought of staying very still and becoming unreadable. All those choices require resources you don't have when fear gets to your hands first. When one man finally walked from his vehicle toward my driver's door, he did not hurry. He did not shout. He moved with a loose, deliberate rhythm, a casualness that was hardest to rationalize. In his hand he held something long and dark, like a bar or a crowbar, tucked against his thigh, reflecting the sodium light in a dull, hungry glint. The van doors behind him closed like punctuation. The others remained in their cars, engines idling, a ring of lamps around me. He stopped at the driver's side and tilted his head as if listening, not for words but for tone. My window was up, my hands trembled over the wheel. He tapped the metal of my door with 2 knuckles, 3 small, soft sounds, and said, as if reciting a courtesy, "You took the wrong way." There was 1,000 ways to answer. I tried the easiest one. I couldn't have known. I muttered something about detours and GPS and apology. He smiled without humor. "Everyone owes," he said, and his voice folded into the engine hum like a second bass line. The phrase had no context, but it hung in the air like a claim. I threw the car into drive and lunged forward. For a breathless instant a narrow gap opened. My bumper scraped something soft and metallic at the edge of the road, sending a stinging vibration through the chassis. A man lunged and surged after me, not quite catching the fender but catching the rush of air as I passed. The ring of headlights followed, 10 reflections, 20, as though the industrial area had leaked a dozen more unlit cars into the alleys. The stench of oil and hot rubber and acetone punched at my face. I didn't stop. My tires shredded on concrete turned to gravel. The car shuddered, but it kept going. I smashed through a chain-link fence where the road bent toward the freeway, metal protesting in a scream that sounded like a distant animal. I saw the sign for the highway as if through salt in the eyes and steered toward it like a thing hoping for rescue. On the on-ramp I looked in the mirror. The parked cars and men were not there. The road behind me was a flat, ordinary sprawl of warehouses and stacked pallets, empty as if they'd never been. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I took the first exit off the interstate, pulled into a 64-hour truck stop, and sat in the car for an hour, engine idling, counting my breath until it steadied. I reported it at the police station in a voice that sounded small even to me. They checked the logs, called nearby yards, radioed the precincts. No clusters of cars were reported. No missing persons. No one on any camera in that industrial strip had unusual activity. A patrolman told me sometimes people get spooked on unfamiliar roads, sometimes memories mix with fear. His radio crackled commuter nonsense. He handed me a card and recommended I drive more cautiously. I drove home on the main roads after that, avoiding shortcuts like superstitious gestures. The neatness of the answer, my escape, my breath returning, the men gone, was both relief and accusation. I'd been seen, followed, nudged. I had escaped by the slimmest margin and no one could file the right form for that. The shape of what had happened remained sharp in my memory, the choreography of headlights, the way vehicles arrived from different directions as if the lots themselves breathed them out, the man who tapped the door and said I owed. Weeks later, when the city moved on and the world forgot the night, I found 3 long scratches along the passenger side of my car where metal had pulled against paint. There were small flecks of yellow paint in the groove's sodium lamp pigment, I realized, and only then did the memory coagulate into a simple, terrible truth. I had driven into a place where someone kept not one vehicle but many, and where the act of following from every direction was not accident but design. I had survived. I had my car. I told the story because survival needs witness. I will not take that shortcut again. And if you think shortcuts save time, remember, sometimes the shortest path goes through people who already know how to arrive from every direction. I had been driving long enough that the highway felt like a memory I could reach for and pinch between my fingers. It had been a simple day: errands, a late lunch, a detour sign that promised a faster way home, and by the time the sky went sour with evening I was already impatient, willing to trust any shortcut that threatened to shave 10 minutes off my route. The GPS barked and recalced as we were redirected onto a narrow street that wound between warehouses and backyards. At first it was ordinary: cracked pavement, a single flickering street lamp, laundry hum on a line that moved like a slow metronome. I told myself the city had neighborhoods like this, forgotten, useful, and that I had simply stumbled into one. Rational explanations felt like ballast. I kept going. The lane narrowed until it became an alley. Chain-link fences scraped my mirrors, trash compactors slept at the edges, a neon sign buzzed intermittently down the block. I saw the wrong turn as a momentary misstep, the sort of thing you shrugged off. There was room to swing the car around. I told myself I'd do a 3-point turn and be gone. I could already see the highway's orange halo in my mind. As I eased forward to make the maneuver, the alley ended in a rusted roll-up gate an arm's length across. It was a dead end, not in any map I'd ever studied. The gate's padlock hung loose like an eye. Beyond it, the backs of buildings were stacked like the ribs of something dead. I put the car in reverse. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first they were nothing, small, uncertain, like someone shifting their weight. Then a flashlight winked against the gutter and settled, a bright star in the dark. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster and into the beam. He was ordinary in the way ordinary things were worst: a heavy jacket, hands in his pockets, boots with mud on the toes. He did not shout. He did not smile. He walked toward the rear of my car and waited, the light rigid in his fist. Another light answered, then another. The flashlights crested the fences and moved like small moons across windows and security cameras, hitting my rear view like nails. Shapes slipped out of doorways and between bins with the same slow deliberation. They came without hurry and without noise, a dozen of them, then 2 dozen, then more, until the alley was ringed with pale faces and mechanical beams. I told myself it was some kind of neighborhood watch. I told myself they were odd but harmless. It was a script I read because the alternative required too much violent possibility. For a few breaths I tried to catalog how many. Do any of them call out? But rationality began to fray under the pressure of their attention. Their light made the space between us a stage. I was the last actor who hadn't yet spoken my line. A voice cut the quiet. "You wrong way, friend." It wasn't accusatory. It was a statement without either kindness or contempt. A man near my passenger door tapped the hood with 2 fingers. The sound was small and unremarkable, but it landed like a verdict. I tried to laugh, sounded like a dry cough, and told him I'd turn around. He tilted his head and the flashlight painted his face in a way that made his eyes unreadable. I put the car in drive and eased forward toward the gate, reasoning that maybe it would lift, that this was some maintenance crew, that they would step aside when they saw the headlights gather. The engine's soft protest died mid-roll. The car lurched and then stilled. The dashboard readouts flickered, like a living thing taken aback. My foot pressed the pedal and felt the hollow slack of the brake beneath it. The whole machine had become stranger than a machine should be. A narrow, adult hand, callous knuckles, touched my passenger door and then moved along the metal as if feeling for dents. Another hand tapped the tail light. The flashlight beams were not searching for me. They cataloged the car, paint, license plate, the sticker on my bumper that advertises a neighborhood church. They looked, and they took notes with their eyes. I tried the horn. It sounded small and distant. No one flinched. Instead, they changed their spacing, moving in a slow, controlled motion to fill the small gaps between bins and dumpster doors. My exit back the way I come shrank under their bodies. They had a choreography, 2 abreast, then 3, then columns forming from shadow. I watched a man cross from one side to the other as if tracing invisible marks in the dirt. When he reached the center, he lifted his hand and the others halted. The movement had the accuracy of practice. My hand shook so badly I couldn't hold the wheel steady. I counted rational things, numbers, distances, the geometry of escape, but the calculation failed against the simple fact of their presence. They were not interested in my explanations. When I mouthed an apology, it was like saying grace in a crowded chapel. "Pay up," another voice said. Closer. Calm. Not a threat but a ledger entry. "You stopped in wrong place. What do you want?" I asked, voice thin and sharp, the kind of question an animal might make when cornered. The men didn't answer with words. One stepped close enough that I could see the skin under his fingernails was rough. He set something on my trunk, a small leather pouch with a weight inside. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He placed it there with the businesslike tenderness of someone who had done this before. I felt something like a tide. Impatience tipped into fear and fear into a hard, clear instinct. Move. I jammed the car into reverse and floored it. Gravel spat and the tires bit. A body slid across my hood like a shadow. Something heavy thumped against the bumper and the paint shrieked in protest. Someone grabbed the antenna and it snapped with a dry pop. I saw faces in the rearview, calm, composed, almost curious, receding into a halo of light as I squealed past. The pouch skittered and fell from the trunk, disappearing under a shuttered delivery bay. They did not chase, not past the gate. They parted like a curtain, a scene that allowed one frantic animal to slip through and not another. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, headlights lancing into the whitewash of the city, lungs burning, hands cramped on the wheel. At a diner that smelled of coffee and bleach, I sat and tried to make sense of it, fingers tracing the ragged scratch along the hood where something had scraped. I called the police when they offered. The woman at the dispatcher's desk took notes and promised patrol cars. When officers checked the alley the next day, the gate was locked, the dumpsters in their places, no sign of a crowd. They found the leather pouch. I had left it on the seat when I swore I'd remembered every detail, and its contents were ordinary coins, old and dirty, the sort you might find in a car ashtray. The officer shrugged and said some people kept to their own rules, that urban myths grow where light is thin. He handed me a card. He told me to stay on well-lit roads. I took the advice like a bandage. Months later, I learned by accident that the alley's building had been purchased by a small, quasi-legal towing operation that occasionally rented out parking for off-the-books activity. Someone at the diner said neighbors had called it a collection point, a phrase no one said outright. There were rumors of other drivers who'd been asked for money, local anecdotes without police reports. The possibility anchored itself like an explanation, predatory, organized, patient. I did not go back to check. The scratch on my head remained a pale line, a parallel to the memory. I waxed over it twice and the scar only softened. The last time I drove that way, I took the detour signs seriously and kept my eyes on the highway lights. I survived because I drove through a narrow seam with the kind of clumsy speed that panics even the patient. That is the ending. I went in by mistake. I was corralled by people who had turned watching and waiting into a craft, and I escaped. My body remembers the sting of their hands and the weight of that pouch. My mind catalogs the geometry of the alley like a map to avoid. If you ever find yourself at the end of a lane and the light angles wrong and silhouettes gather where there should be none, don't look for polite explanations. Count your exits. Keep the engine warm. Drive. I was tired enough that the world had gone soft-edged. The last highway exit had been a smear of orange reflectors and a blinking detour arrow. I shrugged and followed it because shortcuts are how you salvage evenings. At first the back road felt ordinary, 2 lanes, cracked paint, maples pressing their dark fingers toward the hood. My phone flashed no service and the GPS drew a blank, but I had landmarks in my head, a church steeple, a grain silo, a turn that would spit me back to the main road. Dusk went thick as I drove. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. A barn dog barked once and then stopped as if listening to a farther sound. I kept the headlights low, the car a small lantern slipping between tree trunks. Somewhere ahead a stand of poplars opened to a clearing. The road narrowed and the pavement soured into gravel. That's when I saw the waving. He was at the edge of the clearing, a lone man with an arm raised high, moving his whole shoulder in a frantic semaphore. From my ankle he looked thin as a silhouette and soaked water beaded like sweat across his jacket. I slowed and killed the music, the car settling with a low vibration. The reflex to help is idiot simple. You see a person in motion and you stop. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, tilled the engine, and rolled the window down. "Hey," I called. My voice sounded too loud in the still air. "You okay?" He waved his hand again and stepped forward a small amount, as if validating that the car was real. Up close he smelled of river mud and something coppery, blood, or rust, or both. "Help me," he said, voice raw, and I saw then that his left sleeve was torn and dark at the cuff. My rational brain split the scene into tidy possibilities. He'd crashed, someone else was hurt, maybe there were kids in need. The irrational part, the animal part, went quiet because the man's need was obvious. I said, "Do you want me to call?" and my phone scrolled uselessly. "No service," I said. He shook his head and pointed, silent, toward the tree line where the road bent into shadow. I stepped out with my flashlight anyway. Night settles quickly under trees. The beam cut a thin, honest cone. The man's teeth caught the light when he smiled, and the smile was too weary to trust. "Car broke," he said. "Down there." He indicated the curve where I could make out the tail of the road dipping into black. That was when the woods exhaled and other points of light blinked on. It began as a match struck, 2 flashlights catching on trunks, a slow, steady appearing like an arranged constellation. People slipped from behind trees, from the shadow of a low ditch, from where the undergrowth made small hollows. At first I thought they were neighbors, late responders, curious onlookers, but they walked differently. They were not hurried or shouting. They came out in pairs or alone, hands empty or in pockets, faces gray in the direct cone of light. There was no chaos to their approach, only the deliberate, spaced cadence of people stepping into formation. The rational scripts tried to run, perhaps volunteers hunting a lost hiker, perhaps a search party, perhaps a funeral procession gone astray. None fit right. Their mouths were closed. Their eyes had the flat focus of people who had rehearsed stillness. One by one they closed the ring around my car, 10, then 20 people, circling so the beams of their flashlights cut across the hood and through my windshield in pale lines. My throat had gone dry. I moved back toward the driver's door and felt suddenly like an actor who'd missed his cue. The man who had first waved at me stood a yard away, hands shoved in his jacket, looking not at me but at the horizon my headlights implied. He said nothing. A woman near him tilted her head and the flashlight picked her cheekbone clean. Her mouth was a thin line. Their breathing was ordered. It seemed choreographed to not startle the night. I told myself aloud, practiced sentences you uttered to buy time, that I would drive slowly through, that people would step aside. I fumbled with the keys and felt my hands betray me with a tremor I didn't own. The engine answered, but when I slipped the car into gear the wheel juddered against gravel as if someone had shifted the road beneath it. The first man stepped forward, very slowly, and lifted a hand not to wave, but to tap the roof of my car with the butt of his fist, a precise, dry sound. "Phone," he said, voice close enough now that I could smell the river on his breath. "Pay what you owe." It should have been demand, and I should have been able to answer with the exact amount of denial. I had no idea what he meant. Instead, my rational thoughts unraveled into fragments. Why would help demand payment? Why silence? Why the formation? I glanced past the headlights into the trees and saw more movement, figures shifting like reeds. I tried to reverse to the main road. Gravel sprayed. The ring adjusted seamlessly, narrowing gaps as if a seamstress were closing a garment. A young man stepped onto the road and planted himself directly beneath my rear bumper. He was too calm for someone trying to stop me. He was, instead, calibrating my options. When I tapped the horn, it sounded thin and the sound bent weirdly away, swallowed by the trees. Adrenaline has a way of focusing thought. My lawyer's brain, the part that catalogs options without emotional color, listed actions: collide and run, lock and wait, negotiate. Collide was the only one that didn't involve begging. I rammed the car into drive, aimed for a gap that might open between two flashlights. The Vanishings seemed closed just as I reached it. Something, an arm, a shoulder, smacked my passenger side with a wet thud. My side mirror folded under the impact. They did not scream. They did not curse. When the car lurched forward, someone pressed a hand flat to the hood as the vehicle moved and slid along it like a placard, fingertips stinging my forearms through the glass. I felt the scrape of metal that would show later, like a signature etched into paint. I drove until the trees thinned and the road spit me onto a familiar shoulder. Only when the halo of town lights broke the horizon did I allow myself to look back. They stood in a ragged line where the gravel met the tree-line, flashlights held steady like lighthouses. The first man, the one who'd waved, raised his arm once, not in farewell but in address, and then turned away. I called 911 from a gas station. My hands still shook so hard the words came clipped. A patrol came, and another, and an officer with eyebrows that narrowed in a way that meant he'd seen enough nights to file me under stories. They returned with flashlights and flyers and a radio static that tasted like authority. In the morning they combed the road, tire ruts, a folded side mirror, a smear of something dark on the hood. A few footprints led into the trees and then stopped at a rank of compressed leaves where the earth had been trodden smooth as theater stage. The police found more than that. Cameras on a nearby industrial gate had recorded a handful of people pacing the lot across several nights, small groups that gathered and disbanded, leaving the gravel complainant and quiet. A woman came forward later with a story about a friend who had disappeared on a back road a month before. Her description matched one of the faces in the footage. A sting was organized. A sweep pulled several people out of a trailer park 6 miles away. They wore the same habit of patience when the cops interrogated them: flat answers, rehearsed silence. The local judge called the pattern organized extortion. It was sordid rather than supernatural. That thought was a kind of mercy. The alternative would have been some ineffable lingering. The men in the trees, I was told, were not ghosts but predators who used the town's geography and the silence of its edges like a trap. They'd learned to make a cry for help into a lure. They made themselves a rule: situate, encircle, demand. They called it a toll. They called it survival. I still sometimes wake with my hands clenched around a phantom steering wheel. The hood still wears the crescent of a smear that wouldn't come off in the car wash. The police closed the case to their satisfaction: arrests, charges, court dates. The news printed a short piece and then moved on. I survived because I kept the engine warm and because, in a moment of thin, sharp instinct, I chose impact over politeness. That is the true ending, not a tidy moral, not a haunted explanation, but the fact that wrong turns sometimes meet people who will make them cost you, and that the only definitiveness you can count on is the distance your tires can buy you if you hit them hard enough. The detour sign was small and unassuming orange square taped over the GPS arrow, and I followed it because I was tired and because I liked the idea of shaving 5 or 10 minutes off the trip. The shortcut took me away from the neon smear of the interstate and down a string of side streets I'd never bothered to remember before, warehouses with sheet metal siding, a church with its parking lot half full, a row of cheap duplexes that smelled of fried food and damp carpet when the wind shifted. Ordinary things and ordinary sights make you careless. My phone battery sat at 12% and the signal flickered out as I turned onto a narrower lane. No service blinked like an accusation. I pulled into a gravel lay-by beneath a rusting street lamp and killed the engine to consult the paper map I kept in the glove compartment, a limp rectangle I'd once promised myself I'd never need. The night pressed close, the lamp above me sputtering and making the street shadows look like they'd been brushed with oil. I had intended to be quick. The map was the sort that smelled faintly of newsprint, the lines of the county like little rivulets. My fingers brushed the crease where a fold had cracked. The metal taste of anxiety was already present in my mouth. As I leaned over the map, my phone gave a soft, final click and died. The last numbers on the screen winked out like embers. I told myself my route, said the street names under my breath, traced the road with my thumbnail. There was a human comfort in small truths. I knew the way, or I would find it. The sound came then, soft, too discreet to be anything but deliberate, the whisper of a seatbelt being fastened, the faint clack of metal. I looked up without thinking and saw through the rear window the silhouette of someone lowering themselves into my car. The motion was as quiet as a shadow folding. For a fraction of a second I thought it was a child playing at stealth. Sane possibilities stacked themselves like dominoes. Prank, mistake, a friend from college with a cruel sense of timing. The person moved with an ease that made my skin go cold. When he buckled the strap, I heard it click, and the sound landed in me like proof. I stood up too fast, the map fluttered to the gravel, and the flashlight from the street lamp left my hands in a useless halo. He reached for the dash, fingers long and steady, and in that small, effortless motion he stole my agency. "Hey," I said. It came out unnecessarily soft. The man did not turn his head immediately. He didn't need to. The interior light bled a weak red from the dome and made his face a smear. When he finally looked at me, there was a small, patient smile that did nothing to reassure. "You shouldn't leave your car running," he said, as if chastising a neighbor. My rational mind sputtered. Maybe he'd mistaken my car for his, or maybe he was drunk and intended only to warm the engine. My rational mind is good at building fortifications of reason when I most need them. My phone's dead. "I'm just checking the map," I said, moving sideways, palms up, the universal human gesture for non-threat. He glanced at the map lying in the dirt, then at the phone on the passenger seat with its blank face. He locked the car with a key I couldn't see. The noise, small, absolute, confirmed what my skin already knew. This was not a mistake. "Close the door," he said. The voice was ordinary, low, and precise. Behind him, the world narrowed to the faint rustle of the grasses at the margin of the lot and the distant leak of a highway somewhere I couldn't see. My hands were too slow. I had no weapon beyond the map and a half-empty water bottle. I thought of throwing the map into his face, of slapping at the steering wheel the way you might try to stall a flow of water. I thought of all the films and overconfident fantasies I'd once stored up, and none of them fit the moment. He was already doing the thing people do who have rehearsed intimacy with a place. He scanned my glove compartment, found the registration, folded it back into its envelope, and slid the small slip into his pocket. Efficiency has a vocabulary. Dust a hand for prints, pocket the evidence, remove the option. "You don't want to make this hard," he said. "Give me the keys." That was not a question. 100 rational explanations evaporated at his tone. The idea that he had been following me, waiting for a place where the asphalt widened and I would be distracted, settled like dust in the air. The map under my fingers crinkled like an old animal. I reached for my keys with trembling fingers. They felt too big in my hand, heavy with normality. He leaned forward and placed his palm over mine, a containment more than a grab. His skin was cool and smelled faintly of machine oil. "No sudden moves," he murmured. It was not really a warning, it was a ledger entry. I tried bargaining, the way you do when all options are bad. "I have cash," I started. "I can call." The phone lay dead, mute and useless. Behind his shoulder a figure moved, soft, silent, enough movement to remind me that he was not alone. My eyes snapped to the side window and I saw, reflected in the glass, other shapes, a darkened pickup backed into the shadows, someone crouched near its rear tire like a statue. The lay-by had a dozen hiding places, and each one conspired to make me a small thing in a large plan. He let go of my hand and sat back, folding his fingers over the steering wheel as if it were a ledger. "You're late on something," he said. "Everyone is." There was a peculiar civility to his tone, as if we were reading the weather together. Panic is a loud animal. I heard it throttle in my ears. My chest worked, my vision narrowed to the bright blue of my car's blinkers and the way his knuckles whitened where they rested on leather. Then the man did something that felt like theater. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thin, black radio. He pressed a button and spoke a phrase so neutral it cut under me. It was a signal, and somewhere in the dark others answered with the rustle of movement. "Stay," he said into the radio, then turned back to me. "We'll be quick." He lasted a heartbeat more as a nurse in my fantasy. Then he turned the key, and the engine answered with a healthy, legal life that made the whole car seem suddenly malevolent. The crackle of the dome light hit the windows and outlined faces beyond the glass, 2 more men, 2 more shapes, stepping forward with the casual, rehearsed calm of people who have done this before. This is the point where the rational mind tends to note the ways out, slam the door, run, scream. But my options had already been banded. The doors locked with an unceremonious electronic tick that sounded to me like a judge's gavel. I did the only thing that did not require courage, only a small, selfish clarity. I climbed into the passenger seat, because staying outside meant being a target walking into a plan. His smile was thin when I did. He tossed my keys onto the passenger side and watched me pick them up. His eyes were flat, predatory in the reserved way of a man who counted the pace of a world in invoices. "We take people's cars sometimes," he said, as if explaining weather patterns. "You should watch where you stop. Night is a long place." He started to back out of the gravel lay-by with a slowness that was rude and deliberate, the headlights washing the trees in front of us. I banged on the window with the side of my fist, then pounded the passenger door. He glanced at me like someone watching a show. There was no compassion, only a businesslike appraisal. I had the keys. I could have tried to turn the engine and drive. I could have risked the physics of sudden movement, the way 2 people in a small metal box manage weight. I thought of sleights of hand and the ethics of survival and the way desperate acts feel in the mouth. Instead I did something simpler, because it was the shape of the only certainty left to me. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and found the small, cheap multi-tool I kept for opening packages. My fingers had learned the curve by habit. I slipped the blade between the door frame and the lock, a childish, fumbling thing, and felt metal give. That sound, the click, was small and miraculous. It was the noise of an unlocked world. He was watching my hands the whole time, but he was also attentive to whatever frequency his companions cried into the radio. People who work in gangs rhythm their attention poorly. Everything that keeps the scheme together is taut, but the seams are where single hands can slip in. When the door popped, his smile fell like a curtain. He braced, but I was smaller and faster in that cramped piece of metal than he expected. I wedged my elbow against his arm and shoved. The car lurched and the door opened a few inches. My shoulder rammed into him and the movement rattled teeth. He reached at me, an animal motion, and I shoved harder, the car bumping along the gravel as his weight shifted. The radio spurted and a voice barked, not words I understood, but urgency threaded through. From the corner of my eye I saw headlights flaring as someone ran from the trees. Someone else had decided to come the other way. I hit the road barefoot, the gravel biting my soles, and ran until my lungs burned and the hill refused to give me speed. I ran toward the orange wash of the highway and the cadence of other drivers, and the sound of my own breathing became a thing I could count. A truck screeched, a man leaned out and shouted, and the world refolded into ordinary motion. I was shaking, my palms raw from the door, my jacket torn. I told the police who I could descriptions of faces that accrued like small facts and watched them write and nod with the professional calm of people who have cataloged similar evenings. They found the car 3 days later, abandoned at the far edge of a lot, doors open, my radio tuned to nothing. The registration had been run through a dozen hands. There were fingerprints on the dash that didn't match mine. They arrested 2 men when they pulled up a tow yard video, faces that had drifted like ghosts, then resolved like actors caught in the light. Papers signed, charges pressed. The police called it a ring, an opportunistic operation picking people who stopped to check maps or call home. I kept the dent where his knee had hit the glove compartment as proof on my car's interior, and I kept the smell of engine oil on my nostrils for a long time. Rationality returned in the form of police reports and court dates, the small legality that turns a story back into a series of actions. The truth was prosaic and ugly. Someone had used the darkness and my inattention to slip into a role and take my life forward without me. I survived because I pushed it weight and because, when a seam opened, I fought through it. The men went to court. One gave a statement about needing money, the other about desperation and habit. No phrase could close the shape of that night. The ending was concrete: arrests, restitution, and the slow, stubborn reassembling of a life that felt, for a while, like a cracked vase glued in a hurry. If there is a lesson, it is not a moral trite enough for a billboard. It is simply this: wrong turns make you small and visible, and ordinary things, maps, phone batteries, the kindness that stops for people on the road, are the very things someone else will plan around. I learned to keep both hands on the wheel and to trust the glow of a 24-hour place. I learned, cleanly and finally, how quickly a quiet man can slip into your life and try to drive it away. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes small decisions feel like they require courage. The highway had been clogged with brake lights and the GPS glitched on a detour. I followed the hand-lettered sign that pointed down a country lane because the alternative was to sit and fume. At first the shortcut felt exactly like that, short. Hedgerows leaned in over the tarmac, the smell of cut hay opened and closed, and farm dogs barked somewhere a long way off. The lane shrank until it was single width, the painted lines gone, the asphalt pocked with gullies that hummed beneath the tires. I kept my speed low. You learn to trust the rhythm of these roads, slow when the bends come, stop in the passing places, see to anyone with a light on a hill. My rear view showed nothing but hedgerow and the orange smear of sunset. Then 2 headlights ballooned, small at first, and settled into place behind me, one vehicle, tail lights patient in my mirror. I found comfort in the obvious explanation: another local, another driver making the same decision. The pickup drew close. At first it was a considerate following distance, then too close, a bar of light that sat under my bumper like a second skin. I glanced at the rear view and saw a wide grille closing the lane, too much of a presence in that narrow corridor. I signaled for a passing place that appeared at a bend and pulled over, leaving a small gap between my mirror and the hedge. The pickup braked, held, then accelerated and shoved up the tarmac with a motion so precise it read like intent. Its fender nudged my back quarter with a metallic kiss that made the car shudder. I honked, more from habit than hope. A thin, deliberate laugh answered through the open window as the heavy thud of a diesel engine followed. The pickup pressed forward and the back of my car rocked. Gravel cracked like old teeth. When I tried to creep forward into the little lay-by, the truck moved to block me, settling sideways across the lane until its rear wing left no path. The driver climbed out with slow, clean movements that suggested this had been rehearsed. He didn't shout. He stood with his hands in his pockets, inspecting me as if I were a clock to be wound. Up close you could see the lines at his eyes and a silence meant to set the mood. Beside him, another pickup eased out of a shadow and parked across the lane, then a third pulled up, doors yawning like animal mouths. They arranged themselves with a calm geometry, fronts touching hedge, tailgates outward so that the lane was a human-locked corridor. Rational explanations stacked themselves in me: road rage, a man with a grievance, kids playing a mean joke. I told myself the simplest: make small talk, apologize, move on. I put the car in reverse to back out slowly. The first pickup matched my motion, then bumped a rear bumper with a careful force like fingers closing a book. It was not reckless, it was a practice pressure designed to box me into the lane. The second man walked up and leaned on my hood as if we were neighbors swapping gossip. "You took the wrong turn," he said without heat. The phrase sounded ordinary until you saw the way he meant it. It held the certainties of billing. I dialed 911 with fingers that refused to be steady. The call rang, a clean tone, and then the line whispered dead static. The single bar indicator on my phone mock smiled and died. The mash of community I depended on unraveled. The men exchanged glances like clerks agreeing a total. They did not ask for money at first. The first man, broad-shouldered, with the easy restraint of someone who expects obedience, walked slowly around my car and tapped the mirror, the door, the roof, as if taking inventory. The touch of his hand on metal was casual and personal. In the side mirror I saw the face of his companion. No hurry, no contempt, only the practiced detachment of someone who had done this before. When he finally opened his mouth, it was to name a price. "You pay for the lane," he said. Not a demand, not a theft, a tariff. An account to be squared. 15, and who'll let you go? I laughed because disbelief felt lighter than fear. "I don't have that," I started. "Put what you have in the pouch," he said. He produced a small leather bag, slapped it on my hood with the casual exactness of a hand that does not tremble. The other men circled, pocketing their phones in deliberate silence like witnesses tucking away evidence. I did what people do when time narrows to a single, urgent arithmetic. I emptied my wallet into the pouch, cards, crumpled bills, a receipt for coffee, and shoved it back through the partially lowered window. The first man counted with slow fingers, eyes like a ledger. He tucked the cash into his jacket with a clerk's neatness and handed back a single bill folded into a receipt. "Route, time, amount." "Keep moving," he said. His voice had the flat finality of a clerk stamping a form. When I reversed, the truck blocking my line didn't lurch to cut me off. It slid, like a door opening, just enough to let my bumper through. But the men did not smile or mock. They stepped aside as though they had done what needed doing. The pickups idled, engines a low, obedient thrum. The lane yawned open and I drove as if I were leaking. Later, at the safety of a gas station, hands trembling in the leather pouch closed beside me on the seat, I called the local police and spoke in narrow breaths. They were patient on the other end. They told me to come in and file a report. I sat under fluorescent light and wrote the details, handed over descriptions that felt crude and inadequate. 3 pickups, plate numbers half remembered, a pouch, a folded receipt with a scrawled sum. The investigation was methodical. Officers combed the lane's verges at dawn and found tire tracks and scuff marks where the pickups had boxed my car. A patrolman caught one of the license plates on a traffic camera an hour later as the trucks dispersed toward a cluster of farm sheds. Within a week 2 arrests were made. The men were part of a small ring, local, opportunistic, using the loneliness of secondary roads as a ledger for extortion. The word on the police blotter was minor but precise. I was given forms to sign and a case number and told to keep the receipts. The detective spoke quietly about deterrence and patrols, and he told me, almost kindly, that my response had likely prevented worse. Compliance had kept me alive in a way brute force sometimes does not. That was a strange comfort. The truth was less cinematic than I had feared. No mythic chauffeur, no occult logic, only men who learned the geometry of lanes and the psychology of isolation and practiced a quiet, administrative cruelty. The ending was clean and conclusive. I had been forced off the road, I had paid, I had driven away, and the law had pursued them in the morning light. They were charged with assault and extortion. The records were public. I still retell it the same way because facts are the thing that slog the fear down into something you can manage. Sometimes I find myself glancing at my mirror on a narrow lane, imagining the metallic notch. The gouge on my rear quarter is a small, honest scar that catches the sun. I live with it. I survived. That is the ending. I got away. I told the story, and the men who used the quiet of the road as currency were put on notice. I had been steering for 2 hours through the slow, indifferent miles that sit between towns, the kind of driving that unbuttons your thoughts and leaves you easy to mistakes. The detour the GPS suggested was only a line on the screen, a thinner ribbon than the highway, and I told myself I was saving time when I turned. For the first half hour everything felt minor: cracked blacktop, a rooster call from a yard, an old pickup parked with its tailgate down. The sun slid behind the trees and the world cooled into a blue that made every shadow look like an eye. After a while the road pinched to a single lane, with farm fields sloping away on either side. Barns started to pass, big red ones, weather-bleached ones, one squat concrete structure with a silo that leaned like an old man. The barns kept repeating in a way that made my stomach tighten, not the exact barns, but the same small details cropping up over and over: the sagging porch swing at the Mitchell place, the missing plank by the eastern door of the Turtle barn, the barbed wire loop hanging from a post like a question mark. I shrugged it off as exhaustion. GPS errors loop roads sometimes. People build their houses in grids, and I had driven a square without noticing. On my third pass the first person stood in a barn doorway. He held himself like a nailed board, feet planted, shoulders rigid, staring at my headlights as if they were a thing that could be studied. He wore an old coat and a hat pulled down, and his face was pale in the light. When you are alone on a road at dusk and someone appears, your reflex is the same as a dog's: you look for what they need. I slowed and flashed my brights, mouthed "You okay?" and felt like an idiot when he didn't move. He simply watched me, unblinking. I told myself the sensible things. He was a farmer, perhaps checking animals. Maybe he'd seen a break in a truck. It made sense for a while. Then, on the next loop, there was someone else in the doorway of the concrete barn, a woman this time, and on the loop after that a boy, arms folded, chin up. Every barn had someone in it. Each person stood in the same rigid way, like a sentinel. Not one of them waved, not one of them called out. Their attention was all aimed at the lane. I tried to keep my voice small and practical. "Anybody need a lift? Do you need me to call someone?" My phone, of course, announced no service. The map in my lap was a folded island of ink that meant nothing out here. Rational excuses piled up: maybe a local festival, a charity drill, and then the facts pressed in. My mirror showed the same stretch of road, repeatedly, and every time the barns returned they had a person framed in their doorway. There were no cars parked. No lights on inside. Only those faces in the threshold, waiting for me. A chill tracked along my forearms. I tried to turn onto a side lane I thought would lead back to the highway. The road angled but spat me out like a pool ball ricocheting off rubber and wood. I drove harder, as if speed could disassemble the circuit. The barns and the watchers held their places and seemed to lean forward a degree. Their faces took on detail in the sweep of headlights: a hollow near a temple, a scar down the cheek, the small, awful clarity of eyes that do not blink when you expect them to. Panic takes shape slowly. First you try to be reasonable. I parked and wrote down the names on a mailbox, trying to anchor place to word. I stopped at a farmhouse with a light still on and knocked. No answer. The lamp above the porch hummed steadily, shadows pulled under the lip of the roof. I stepped back to my car and the road was full of barns again when I looked up, as if the world had folded and stacked itself differently while I counted my breaths. By the time the hour mark arrived, the rhythm was a drum. Each circuit drew more watchers into the doorways. Their numbers multiplied like a pattern emerging on a loom. They did not move off the threshold. They did not shout or wave me away. They made no sound. It was their silence that was loudest and organized, earned hush that felt like a thing trained into muscle. I told myself the police would understand me if I could just get out of that circle and reach them. I found a number and dialed, and for a moment the phone held a connection, a woman's voice asking for location, then it fizzed into static. The line died like a candle snuffed. When I passed the Mitchell barn for maybe the 10th time, the man in that doorway had shifted his weight. That small motion made him terrifying. He stepped down from the threshold and into the yard without changing the expression on his face. One by one, other figures followed, the barn doors arranging a theater of people who had only ever known one stage. They moved as if practiced to do so, a slow, careful closing of the space the lane offered. I slammed the accelerator. The tires protested and threw gravel like spray, the engine keening. They did not scatter like startled birds. They walked toward the lane and kept walking, forming a line that threaded the fields where the fence met the grass. Light swept across shoulders and faces, each person tilted his or her head the same way when I roared past, following me, measuring me with a patience that made my skull ache. I tried every sane response, reversing, flashing, honking, pleading through the lowered window. The most basic civility failed me. "Please," I said, a single small animal sound, "please let me through." A woman's voice, smooth and steady, floated from the line as if wound on a hidden spool. "You came the long way," she said. "You were counted." Whatever that meant had the weight of ritual in it. I saw, for the first time, the signs I had not seen, the little piles of stone stacked near the gate of a field, the painted mark on a fence post repeated in intervals I had mistaken for weathering. The watchers had the patient geometry of people who turn a pattern into a rule. They closed in. A boy ran out and stood directly in front of my bumper and did not cry or shout. His eyes were empty in the way of someone very young or someone who has practiced being very still. Hands touched my hood as the line closed, light catching on rings and calluses that read like tokens. The soundtrack of the night narrowed to the rubbing of denim and the low, resigned rustle of leaves. I had one option, the rawest animal choice left, force. I put the car into gear, lashes flicking with fear, and gunned the engine. Gravel sprayed. The boy's shoulder flashed at the edge of my panic and my bumper clipped him. His body slid along the hood with the sound of wet paper. I cannot unknow the way silence folded at that moment. He did not fall as if broken. He rolled and stood as people in this place had rehearsed doing, as if the state of motion was their property and not mine. Someone touched the hood where his body had passed, felt the metal as if checking the temperature of something that had belonged to them. I kept driving. I passed fields that had been quiet an hour before and now held rows of watchers in their doors, the same faces turned to follow me until I was a moving point of light. By the time the county road rejoined the highway, I was howling with the motor and shaking with the aftershocks of breath. The bright street lamps of the main road felt obscene in their normalcy. At the first open diner, I pulled in like a man jumping from a burning room. Hands still trembling, I told the clerk what I had seen. He listened with the flat, careful attention of someone who hears tall tales at 2 a.m., then slid a cup of coffee in front of me as if a hot, caffeinated thinness could stitch me back together. He called a deputy. They went out in the morning. They found nothing in the barns. The doors were empty, brooms leaning where they had always leaned, a stray horseshoe by a feed bin. But they took my report, and later that week a farmer from the area came into town with a photograph pressed into his fist. A surveillance camera near a grain elevator had caught a ring of people moving from doorway to doorway at dusk on 3 successive nights. The deputy I spoke to after that called them lookouts, and said they had been preying on nighttime travelers for months, corralling and sometimes robbing, sometimes worse. A small ring of arrests followed when the local courts took notice. That was the truth, recorded and legal, human, organized, cruel. It was both comfort and indictment. I had been counted and let go, apparently, because I had forced motion through their choreography and escaped. The thing that would not leave me was not the knowledge that they existed, but the image of a dozen faces, blank and patient, forming a border where the dark met the road. I could say what I had learned: watch your maps, avoid single lanes at dusk, but the real lesson was narrower and stranger. In that county, on that back road, people had learned to stand like doors, and to make a wrong turn mean you belonged to them. I keep the scuff on my bumper. It is a thin, stubborn white line that catches the sun and reminds me that the world can arrange itself into traps with the same ease it arranges itself into roads. I survived. They were ordinary enough to be charged. But sometimes, late, when my headlights cut a span of countryside and the trees make small theater, I see, reflected in my mirror for just a moment, the posture of a man standing in the dark, and realize I drove through someone else's counting. That is the end. I left that night with my teeth clenched and my wallet heavier by fear, and the county learned how to catch its own. I was tired enough that the highway had become a thin, forgettable thread. The GPS chirped a detour and I turned without thinking. Shortcuts felt like competence after a long day. The side road narrowed, trees knitting overhead, and the neon of a weathered sign read vacancy. A motel. Convenient. Practical. The office light blinked and went out as I pulled into the crescent of parking. The glass door latched with a soft click. The lot smelled of warm tar and old coffee. I checked the window, a lonely register, a bowl of mints, a hand-lettered notice, and no check INS after 9. My watch said 9:07. Bad timing, I told myself, and stepped back toward the car. That's when a curtain upstairs twitched. Then another. The motel's second-floor windows were a row of pale rectangles, and each curtain shivered a fraction. Not a draft, the lot was still. The movements lined up like a metronome. I reasoned, people peeking in, a vent, someone adjusting blinds. Rationality soothed for a breath and then failed. The curtains didn't open, they only quivered, as if watching. I moved closer. The fluorescent light hummed and made the building look like an old photograph. A man emerged near the vending machine, denim jacket, hands knuckled by work. He didn't smile. He stood in the light and listened, then lifted his hand, not to wave but like a conductor cueing an orchestra. The curtains answered, an exact small start that made the skin at the back of my neck prickle. "Is this place open?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "You came through late," he said, voice dry. "People watch from their rooms. They don't like strangers." He offered no more hospitality. The office remained locked, the register closed. My rational brain tried another tack. Maybe a family had a reunion, maybe a repair crew. Each explanation had holes the size of molars. The man shrugged, and the curtains twitched again. A detail snagged me. Every doorknob faced inward except two near the office, where the knobs turned outward. "Local custom," he said. I nodded, because people nod instead of thinking when comfort feels thin, and went back to my car. I sat with the engine running like a pulse and tried to leave, but headlights flared. A pickup at the lot's edge breathed out and a sedan slid from behind a hedge, nose blocking the lane. The crescent had rearranged itself into a small arena with me in the center. I called 911. The line rang with a crisp, hopeful sound and then collapsed, no signal. My phone, which had shown a sliver of life, went dead. The man by the vending machine watched me dial without expression and then tossed a cigarette in a practiced arc. The smoke drifted into the lot and made the light look filmy. The curtains did something then I could no longer translate as human. They parted the faintest fraction and a shape leaned into a slit behind the fabric, and I caught my light and did not blink. Doors opened with soft, synchronized motions. People emerged in pajamas and jackets, stepping to their thresholds like actors onto a stage. Ordinary clothes, ordinary faces. Their eyes cataloged me with the flat attention you give a ledger. "You're on our road," said a woman with a receipt pad, voice even. She held out a slip that read room fee, passage paid. Nearby, a man presented a stubbed pad and a stubby pencil. The gesture felt clerical rather than criminal, protocol, not threat. When I told them I had nothing, they did not argue. A girl took my keys with casual efficiency and dropped them into a small metal box. Coins and cigarette packs and a folded note were offered back in palms like change from a till. The denim man read aloud the stub and stamped it with the slow finality of a clerk. "Pay the fee," he said. "We don't like strangers in the Crescent." I tried to leave. I turned the key, the engine coughed and died. I tried again, nothing. The dome light popped and blackened. The motel's fluorescent strip hummed as if amused. They advanced in a slow, geometric line and then halted at the parking island, hands out as if conducting a transaction. There was no shove, no raised voice, only the practical choreography of people who had made a trade of keeping watch. They left me a choice: walk. The grounds were small, the highway was a dark seam on the horizon. A man kept pace a respectful distance behind me, another shadowed the shoulder of the road. The curtains gave themselves a last little flutter of attention, and then settled. I walked until the motel sign was a pale notch behind me and my phone woke with one bar. I called the police from the highway and told them everything: curtains, receipts, the metal box, the way they took my keys like clerks balancing a till. At dawn, officers returned to the motel and found a dozen people arrested, protesting mildness, receipts stacked in a shoebox. They found the metal box with my keys, slips of typed paper, and a ledger scrawled with times and amounts. The desk register showed no check-ins after 9. The owner had authorized nothing. The prosecutor called it extortion. The judge called it criminal. Names were taken, bonds set. The motel closed for a week to be scrubbed, cameras installed. There was nothing supernatural to record. The curtains had twitched because human hands had pulled them. The watching eyes had been human eyes. The true horror was administrative. A small community had learned to convert a deserted crescent into a toll booth, turning strangers' confusion into revenue. They had a system, signals, parked cars, a pad and pencil, a metal box. The ledger was paper and the ledgerers were ordinary people. I survived because I walked and because the law eventually found a pattern to break. I kept the stamped slip in my wallet for months, a tiny rectangle that smelled faintly of plastic and fear. I stopped taking detours at night. I fill the tank before the light fades. I trust the blue line only when it stays on well-lit roads, and sometimes, late, when the wind is still, I hear a curtain twitch in memory and realize how easily ordinary places can be made into instruments. The ending was prosaic: arrests, paperwork, patrols, but the memory remains, a row of curtains moving in metronome time and a dozen ordinary faces arranging themselves into a ledger. I drove a wrong turn into their crescent and, by motion and luck, I came back out. I was exhausted when the GPS chirped and insisted I take the faster route through a patch of country roads I'd never traveled. The highway had been crawling with traffic, brake lights blinking like red warning beacons into the growing dusk. I followed the detour, thinking a little backroad shortcut couldn't hurt. At first, it was exactly that, ordinary. Narrow asphalt, telephone poles casting long shadows, a farmhouse here, a cow pasture there. I passed a small creek, then a bend in the road, and suddenly the bright, buzzing sign of a gas station appeared. Not on my route, exactly, but perfectly convenient. I slowed as I pulled in. The station was one of those old rural places, the kind with a single pump, faded paint, and a narrow awning. Outside stood a man in a worn denim jacket, leaning against the post like he'd been counting something. His gaze lifted as I drove in, trained, precise. I parked, glanced at the GPS again, and then looked at him. He straightened slightly, then crouched, glanced at the pump, then back at me. Counting. I laughed nervously, muttering, "Weird guy, huh?" My rational brain shoved aside the feeling in my gut. Maybe he worked there. Maybe he liked to watch cars pull in anything normal to explain it. I turned the wheel to leave, GPS recalculating, and the road led me in a tight curve back to the same station. The man was in exactly the same place, counting. The light from the pump glinted off his wrist, and I could have sworn he had a notebook, though I couldn't see clearly. My pulse hit a staccato rhythm. Maybe I missed a turn. I tried again, left, right, even a U-turn, but each exit funneled me back to him. Counting, watching. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Exhaustion, I whispered. You're tired. But the sun had dipped behind the hills, the sky a bruised purple, and the station's fluorescent lights hummed a little too long. The man's head tilted as I approached. I could feel his eyes tracking me. I parked and got out. He didn't move toward me, didn't speak. He simply raised one hand, extended a finger, and seemed to silently gesture at the GPS. The absurdity of it should have been funny, but the gesture was too precise, too controlled. It was a warning. I got back in the car and tried again. Left, right, a U-turn, always the same. Always the station. Always him, counting. The GPS now seemed almost malevolent. It recalculated with each attempt, leading me back like a predator herding prey. My hands shook on the wheel. Then the headlights appeared behind me. One car, tailing from the moment I first pulled onto the detour. I tried to accelerate, but the road's turns were sharp, unfamiliar. The car followed, not closely, but with the patience of someone who knew I had nowhere to go. I slammed the wheel into a side road that seemed promising, only to find myself back at the station again. And now, more people were standing outside, scattered like sentries. I could see 4, maybe 5, each one observing the cars, raising a finger in silent arithmetic. They were counting cars, counting me, counting time. I started the car, frantically trying to force it forward. The engine hesitated, coughed. I had not noticed the pump hose lying across the asphalt, coiled as if deliberately placed. My tires caught the rubber, slid, and the engine stuttered. One of them stepped closer, slow and deliberate, without fear. I locked the doors, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Rational thoughts competed with the dread building in my chest. Maybe it was a prank. Some small-town cult. But there was no humor here. They weren't laughing. They weren't hiding. They were calculating, observing, and letting me realize there was no escape. I tried my phone, still nothing. No bars. No calls. Nothing. The world outside the car shrank to the asphalt, the glowing sign, and the figures who now seemed to have multiplied. More men, more women, spread along the lot like a slowly closing net. The one I'd first seen raised his finger again, then tilted his head in what felt like instruction. Panic seized me. I forced the wheel left, a sharp turn onto the gravel, tires scraping, heart hammering. The GPS recalculated, cheerfully and cruelly, and spit me right back. I slammed on the brakes. They had moved closer, circling the car, silent, patient. Counting. always counting. I yelled, "What do you want?" My voice cracked in the cold night air. The first man stepped forward, and I saw his face clearly for the first time, calm, unreadable, entirely human but without empathy. "You owe the road," he said. Just those words. No explanation, no emotion. "You came here. It counts." Then I understood this was never about directions. It was about control, about being forced into a pattern, about a tally where my freedom was an entry. And it was my turn to be counted. I tried to escape again. Tires spun on gravel, headlights flashing across denim and boots. But each exit led back. Each turn returned me to the same lot. The night swallowed me. The counting increased, voices whispered numbers just beyond comprehension. My body trembled, a puppet to roads that refused to let me go. When the police finally came hours later, though it felt like days, they found the gas station empty. No one outside, no pumps active, no tire tracks besides mine. The lot was deserted. There were no surveillance cameras, no receipts, no evidence of anyone. I drove home in silence, windows up, engine screaming under the effort. The GPS now showed the highway clearly, unthreatened, open. But I never took another shortcut. I never went down a rural back road again. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see that station in the distance, a flicker of neon, a figure counting cars, waiting. I survived, yes. But every road, every turn, is haunted now by the memory of being counted endlessly, until the night itself seemed to tally my fear. It was just after sunset when I left the highway, following what I thought was a shortcut. My phone's GPS insisted I turn onto a thin, overgrown path, one of those roads that had probably been paved decades ago and then abandoned to weeds and piles. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and dying leaves. My tires crunched along gravel and broken asphalt, and the trees pressed close on either side, letting only the last rays of sun dapple the hood of my car. At first, everything seemed ordinary enough. The road narrowed, twisted, and the shadows grew long, but it was quiet, peaceful almost. I told myself I was just being cautious. Back roads have their charms. I noticed an old mailbox, leaning, with peeling paint, and a rusted fence disappearing into the brush. The GPS recalculated a few times, but I didn't worry. I assumed the path simply meandered before rejoining the main road. Then I saw the car. A dark sedan, hazard lights blinking, abandoned, or so it seemed. It was parked crookedly, front wheels turned into the weeds, one door ajar. My chest tightened, but I told myself people break down all the time. I slowed, pulled over, and put my flashers on. My car felt suddenly exposed, the path more constricted than before. I stepped out and called out, "Hey! You need help?" No reply. The air was still, the only sound the faint rasp of leaves in the wind and the creak of an old branch overhead. I circled to the driver's side, peering in. No one. Empty. Keys in the ignition. The radio was dead. My stomach sank. Maybe someone had left in a hurry. I backed up a little, deciding to call the police and report a stranded vehicle, when movement caught my eye. A shadow, tall, solid, just at the edge of the tree line behind my car. My pulse quickened. I glanced around. No other cars, no lights, nothing. The shadow shifted. Someone was there. And they were holding something. A crowbar. Blackened steel, worn handle, resting casually in one hand. My mind scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe a passerby, maybe someone trying to help. But the way he stood, still, patient, like he had been waiting, made my chest tighten into a ball of dread. My hands trembled on the hood of my car as I realized I had no escape. The path behind me was overgrown. Turning around meant backing straight toward him. I fumbled for my keys and slid back into the car. The engine roared to life like a lifeline, but the crowbar's holder didn't move. He simply stepped forward, slow, deliberate, emerging from the shadows with each step. Panic clawed my throat. I threw the car into gear, tires skidding over gravel, trying to turn onto a side path, but roots and ruts caught the wheels. He was closer now, the metal of the crowbar catching what little light remained, reflecting a dull, dangerous gleam. I tried to stay calm, to think. Rational explanations ran thin. Maybe he's crazy, maybe he just wants money, I told myself, voice tight, trembling. My grip on the wheel was white-knuckled. Hazard lights of the abandoned car flickered behind me, but it didn't matter. Nothing behind me was safe, nothing in front offered relief. I slammed my foot on the gas, forcing the car over a slight rise. He froze for a heartbeat, then ran. Not toward me at first, he ran parallel, cutting me off, keeping pace. My headlights caught his eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on me with patience and cruelty. I tried another turn down a narrow fork in the path, a chance at distance, but every turn seemed to trap me back in the same clearing. The hazard-blinking car, the trees, the crowbar-wielding figure, it was like the forest itself had bent to funnel me toward him. I considered abandoning the car, but the ground was soft, rutted, and the crowbar made that choice unthinkable. Each heartbeat thumped like a drum of doom as I edged forward, trying to force momentum, tires gouging the dirt. He advanced steadily, step by measured step, until I realized the horror of the moment. If I slowed, even for a second, he could reach me. If I stopped, even for breath, the crowbar would swing. A final rational thought pierced through terror, momentum. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning, engine screaming, and aimed for the only gap between two leaning trees at the edge of the clearing. My car leapt over the roots, scraping branches against the roof, and I didn't look back. The figure stumbled at the edge, maybe trying to anticipate the motion, maybe simply caught off guard. I barreled down the old path, adrenaline and fear keeping the engine alive when it wanted to die. The trees thinned. The overgrowth gave way to the remnants of an old service road, wide enough for 2 cars. I didn't slow. I didn't breathe. I drove until the orange glow of a highway exit appeared in the distance, lights spilling like salvation. When I finally pulled over at a gas station miles later, shaking, heart hammering, I called the police. They told me the path I described didn't exist in any official records, and the abandoned car had no reports filed. They were polite, skeptical, and efficient, but their reassurance felt hollow. I drove home in silence, the crowbar and the shadow burned into my vision. That night, and every night since, I replay the path in my mind. The sound of tires crunching gravel, the gleam of steel in the dark, the patient step of someone who has been waiting for hours, or maybe days. The shortcut doesn't exist on any map, but the memory does. And sometimes, when I drive after dark, I see a flash of metal at the edge of the woods and remember that patience has teeth, and terror can be deliberate, calculated, and patient. I survived. But every unfamiliar path now carries the weight of that crowbar, the inevitability of being counted, and the knowledge that some wrong turns are permanent.